A good Tuesday morning to you on this July 27th, and thanks for joining us here on Real Talk. For those of you local, those of you that live in the same part of, live on the same terroir as we do here on planet Earth, just a quick reminder that band you just heard, that's Ayla Brooke and the Soundmen, will be playing downtown Edmonton tonight. And I'm looking forward to that show. You're going to find them at the Taste of Edmonton. That mentions on us, Ayla Brooke. Thanks so much for your music, the gift of the soundtrack from Real Talk. 9:30 this evening. Be there or be square. This episode of Real Talk is presented by the team at Bitcoin Well. Bitcoin's moving again. You're going, what? This doesn't even make sense. Why is it rising again? It was just falling. Now it's rising? What? If you have questions, you know where to find them. If you want to buy or sell Bitcoin safely, your friends are telling you should have a Bitcoin wallet. You don't even know what that means, let alone how it works. Do it. I literally walked in there. You start with a phone call, an email, whatever. And I was like, can you guys just treat me like somebody that's starting at absolute square one and kind of spell this out for me? Because otherwise, it feels a little, well, you're a little trepidatious, aren't you? Avoid trepidation. Look for Bitcoin Well under the sponsors tab on our website, ryanjesperson.com.
Real Talk starts right now. Here's Ryan Jesperson.
We've got a lot going on the show this morning. In just a few minutes, we'll check in with the CEO of Economic Development Winnipeg. There's a rumor that Winnipeg might be the most intelligent community in the world. And so we've just pushed a tweet out from our official account at Real Talk RJ. If you're not yet following us on Twitter at Real Talk RJ, please do. We're going to start rolling out incentives and benefits, by the way, in the next couple of weeks for followers of our Twitter accounts. This is going to be very exciting. You're not going to want to miss out on that. So give us a follow at Real Talk RJ. It's where we release our show lineups every single morning. And, of course, where we release opportunities for participation and comment. There's this intelligent community forum. It's a global network, a think tank, essentially, at its core. And they've narrowed down their top 7 most intelligent communities in the world. Now, our friends in Manitoba, before you start getting all uppity on the rest of us, this has nothing to do with your IQ, so I'm sure they're astounding and impressive. But it has to do with how your cities are built and how your cities plot out and achieve economic and social and cultural growth. And you might be saying, well, what are the other cities? Would it make you feel pretty good if we told you that 3 of the top 7, 3 of the final 7 are Canadian communities? This is a pretty exciting one. Winnipeg, Mississauga, the township of Langley, BC. And then you've got Binh Duong, Smart City in Vietnam, Moscow, Curitiba, Paraná in Brazil, and Townsville in Queensland, Australia. So we'll find out from Dayna Spiring, the CEO of Economic Development Winnipeg, what Winnipeg's case is, what they'll be arguing when it comes to making their case to achieve that top ranking, the most intelligent city in the world. We're also going to be joined by New York Times recommended author Sarah Everts a little bit later on in the show. Sarah is the author of The Joy of Sweat, The Strange Science of Perspiration. And so leading up to this, we've pushed a poll out. This is, again, one of our unofficial, unscientific Twitter polls. And I've got this on my Twitter right now, and we wanted to check in on this early. Now, we're having a little fun. We took a bit of a fun angle on this, and so we're asking you, when looking for a partner for the night or forever, which scent impacts you most? And we've given you 4 choices. Number 1, a natural musk. Number 2, a simple scent, freshly showered. You know that smell. If I were to endorse a soap, I might think back to effective advertising from the 1980s and into the early 90s. Irish Spring, that type of idea. A subtle perfume or cologne or other. And we've asked you to detail below. Now, we're early in the poll. We've just pushed it out about 10 minutes ago. And after about 135 votes, it would appear that the leader here is a simple scent. Freshly showered, 58% of respondents choosing that. 30%, approximately 1 in 3, are voting for a subtle perfume or cologne. 8% are voting for a natural musk, and about 3% of you were saying other, and we'll get into some of the details below. This is a very personal question for the producer of this show, Sarah Hoyles, but do you wish to go on the record here regarding which scent might impact you most?
I'm going to be boring. I go along with everybody else. I'm a lemming. Freshly showered.
Simple and freshly showered.
Just fresh.
Freshly showered. I mean, I included the word subtle on purpose here regarding perfume or cologne.
Yuck.
Because you can have like, that sort of, it's like an art with the amount with which you would apply cologne. Too much cologne or too much perfume can be quite overpowering. Can be more overpowering than a really strong musk.
I agree. However, I have a crazy, intense, amazing sense of smell. So any cologne or any perfume gives me a headache and makes me nauseous, like physically ill. So
there's a serious sensitivity there.
Yeah. So to me, I'm like, no, none, zero. Okay. The date will be ending early.
So someone could be meaning very well. They could be going into the top shelf of their scent closet.
Yeah.
And ultimately, I mean, they'd be putting the nail in their coffin with you without even knowing it. Right out of the gates, they'd be in trouble.
Cut it out.
Think of all that wasted Axe body spray.
Right.
That they could have just left in the can. Sam, back in your dating days, don't want to get you in trouble here, or perhaps you and your lovely partner are getting set for a night on the town. What might be your preference? The natural musk, the freshly showered scent, a subtle perfume or cologne, or other?
First of all, Axe body spray makes me cringe like nothing else. Axe body spray came out when I was in junior high, and the boys would blast each other with it in the locker room.
Oh, yeah.
And nobody wins in that equation.
No.
It was just...
Well, it depends.
It's triggering.
It depends
Yeah.
because junior high locker rooms can also have a real... That's when you start talking about the heavy musk, and then you got to make your choice. So what's better, the Axe or the musk? But
Yeah,
what
and
would be your preference?
I'm with Sarah, freshly showered. It's you kind of get a little subtle scent of whatever soap they use, but it's washed and it's clean and everything's just like kind of perfectly in line there. Yeah, I'm
Okay.
Well, I'll add another vote for freshly showered.
Since we've started talking, I'll note that freshly showered has dropped a percentage point, and subtle perfume or cologne is starting to climb 1 percentage point at a time. Again, this is an unscientific, unofficial Twitter poll. More on our official polling from the team at Y Station a little bit later on in the broadcast. All right, let's talk about Winnipeg in a second. First, we wanted to remind you that this show is made possible by the support of our amazing partners, including the teams at Friesen Brothers with 16 locations across Alberta. We love hearing from real talkers that are able to take in the Friesen Brothers experience maybe for the first time. Got this post over the weekend from Kim. How great is this? Kim says, when you've been listening to Real Talk from Calgary for 8 months, of course, Calgary doesn't yet have a Friesen Brothers. Kim says, and you find yourself in Fort Saskatchewan and you need a break from your family, and Friesen Brothers is open till 11. She says it's Jesperson's fault. Thanks to Ryan and my Chatterbox friends, it does live up to the hype. And then Kim posts this photo she's taken of the sort of like dusk highlights, that amazing evening splash of color across the beautiful glass front of Friesen Brothers' stunning Fort Saskatchewan store. She hashtags advertising works, and then includes the Real Talk RJ hashtag. Kim, we're so thrilled to hear that you had a chance to take it in. The Friesen Brothers experience is like no other. You can find them, as mentioned, 16 Alberta communities, including that brand new store in South Edmonton. There's Fort Saskatchewan, which is another one of their crown jewels, Stony Plain, Hinton, and many others. You can find them online just by linking through the sponsors tab at ryanjesperson.com. We also wanted to give a big shout out. This is an exciting opportunity for our home city of Edmonton. Coming up August 20th through 22nd, it is the World Triathlon Championship Finals. And there's so much going on for triathlon fans, spectators, maybe even those of you, this is your first time checking out this unbelievable sport. There are so many things that are happening, including the elite races, which is a really exciting opportunity for Alberta's capital city. You can check out the local Edmonton athletes that are participating, and we'll be featuring them over the next month. And of course, there's an Olympic connection to the World Championships. Learn more about the World Triathlon Championship Finals in Edmonton at edmonton.triathlon.org. All right, the Intelligent Community Forum, a global network, as mentioned, with a think tank at its center connecting hundreds of cities and regions on 5 different continents for collaborations, best practices on economic development, for an exchange of expertise, information that drives progress. The ICF has narrowed down its list of the most intelligent communities in the world to its top 7, Winnipeg among them. Dayna Spiring is the CEO of Edmonton Development Winnipeg. Economic Development. Did I just say Edmonton Development? And
Yeah, you did.
Oh, Dayna.
This is a national show.
This is
Come on.
This is a national show, and I've unintentionally trolled our first guest with a Freudian slip. Dayna, my sincere apologies, the CEO of Economic Development Winnipeg. It's so good to have you here on the show, and a good morning to you.
Good morning. Good morning. I'll forgive you for that little slip up. We've got a little time for you to make it up to me.
Yeah, we do. That's right. Well, I'll tell you this. I got a lot of love for Winnipeg. My wife is from Winnipeg, so I'm going to hear about this when I get home, I'll tell you.
Hey.
You know, we could have chosen, I guess, 3 Canadian cities to check in with: Winnipeg, Mississauga, and the township of Langley. 3 of the top 7 finalists, which is great. Why is Winnipeg there? What's the major case to argue as one of the most intelligent communities in the world?
You know what, the ICF group defines an intelligent community as a city that's used technology. They've used innovation. They've upped their game, but they've also brought everybody together. And they've made technology accessible to big parts of their population. You know, Winnipeg has done so much over the last 10 years. If you haven't been to Winnipeg in 10 years, I would tell you haven't been to Winnipeg. And we've got a lot to be proud of. So they've recognized that. They've recognized a lot of the achievements that we've made, and they've named us the top 7 for the 4th time in the past 10 years.
That's incredible. 4 times in 10 years. I mean, you get to the point where when you're not on the list, you wonder what's going on, right, Dayna? So what when you talk about this decade of change or this decade of evolution or growth, I'd love to get into what that's looked like tangibly, but where did that start? I mean, did that start with resolve 10 years ago and a real game plan moving forward?
You know what? I think it started by the fact that Winnipeg has a really connected business community. So it's one of those kind of big, small towns. And I can bring CEOs from our biggest corporations together, you know, in the span of an afternoon. And we can talk about what's possible, and we can figure out what we can use and what we can leverage and how we make things better as a city. You know, we have a city council that also wants to participate in that, and they've been great partners for us, and we at Economic Development drive it. So we want to understand where our competitive advantages are. We want to understand where we fall down, and we want to understand how to do better. So this is one of those forums where we've been able to compare ourselves against some of the best cities in the world, and we've been able to learn from them, and frankly, we've stolen the best ideas and we've ditched the bad ones. So, you know, we continue to get better. And I think Winnipeg is really reaping the benefits of that.
So how would you describe Winnipeg as most different in comparison to what it looked like in, 2011?
Well, I think if you start to look at the investments that we've made, both, you know, in our city, in traffic centers where it's all electronic now, it's all done with artificial intelligence. You know, we have Wi-Fi on our city buses, which is really important for kids and people that aren't, you know, having cell phones and wireless plans, right? It's accessible for everybody that they can use that Wi-Fi on buses. Our public libraries also have that connectivity that anybody can go in and they can use. But fast forwarding even beyond that, you know, we've made incredible investments in our city. We have the Canadian Museum for Human Rights. We have the Inuit Art Gallery that opened this year called Kamayork, which makes Inuit art accessible to people around the world. A lot of that is virtual. If you can't come and see it in person, you know, we have opportunities for you to see it virtually. Assiniboine Park Diversity Gardens, you know, we've got one of the best indoor gardens that is almost complete in North America, if not the world. And all of those things are built on technology. They've built on innovation. And they've built things that are just great things for our city. So we've got a lot to show off, and we're pretty proud of what Winnipeg's been able to accomplish.
You just named a whole bunch of things. I mean, I'm really intrigued by traffic management and AI there, but I want to focus in on accessibility to tech because this is an issue around equity too, right? And you talk about Wi-Fi on public transit. Are you already seeing, or did you see early on? You know, a lot of people want to talk about return on investment, right? Did you see almost immediate ROI with regards to things like Wi-Fi on buses?
Yeah, I mean, we start to see the benefits of it very early. There was a big debate in Winnipeg, right? I think there are some people that thought we were putting Wi-Fi on so you could watch Netflix all the way to work. That wasn't the purpose of it. The purpose is to make sure that there is connectivity among all of our citizens, whether they can afford wireless plans or cannot. So we've seen great ROI on that. We've also seen the ability of people to work together and make some of these things happen. And I think that's been really powerful and really impactful for our city.
Can we talk a bit about AI and traffic management? This is the type of stuff that I find fascinating. So I don't know. I don't know anything about how traffic management works. So how would it have been done before? How are other cities probably still doing it? And what's so different or most different about what Winnipeg's doing now?
So we look at it in Winnipeg. We have a traffic management system that is built on traffic flows. So we know what typical traffic flows are, but we can also see, if there's congestion, if there's an accident, if there's different things. AI will then help reset our lights. So you're not going to be stuck at every single light down a street. If there is a disruption, our traffic management center has the ability to change that. Also, which I found really fascinating, if there is an accident or if there is an ambulance or a fire truck that has to come down that road, those vehicles automatically connect with our traffic center and those lights automatically go green for them. So they never have to stop. And all of the lights then adjust around that to make sure that those emergency vehicles get where they need to go as quickly and as safely as possible. I mean, those are great things that technology has given us, right? It's those little things that help make our city better.
Now, your gig is, I always love talking to folks that have positions like yours. I mean, the CEO of Economic Development Winnipeg. So you're at a really high level working with your team. I'm sure that you're going to deflect some of the attention and share the praise around, right? But you work with a team and your entire mandate is to make sure that economic development happens. So that would, I imagine, involve retaining talent that's there, attracting talent to Winnipeg, convincing people to live and work there, raise their families there. Do things like more efficient traffic streams, do you think actually play out into achieving these mandates? I mean, do people notice these types of little things, and does it impact where they choose to live and work?
We talk a lot in Winnipeg about the quality of life that we have in our city. And underneath my umbrella at Economic Development Winnipeg, I have Tourism Winnipeg, I have a Yes Winnipeg business development team. And we all talk about how do we grow the economy, whether we're attracting tourists, whether we're attracting meetings and conventions, whether we're attracting businesses or talent. A lot of the things that people look for are the same. So we talk about the fact that if you come to Winnipeg, your average commute time is 20 minutes. That matters. I mean, if you're coming from Toronto or you're coming from Vancouver or Montreal, 20 minutes is a gift, right? We're talking about cost of living. We're talking about quality of life. And if I can tell you that you can be back and forth to your job and back in 15 or 20 minutes, and you've got more time to spend outdoors, more time to spend at our attractions or at our great restaurants, that matters. We're an hour to cottage country from Winnipeg, right? And if you're coming here to build your life here with your family, that matters. And so I think all of these things are impactful. There's no one thing that says, hey, Winnipeg's got efficient traffic, so we're going to move here. But I think it all goes into that picture, and it all goes into the story that we can tell about how great this city actually is.
Got an interesting comment here from Terry, who's watching from Red Deer, Alberta. She says, just last week we had an ambulance T-boned at an intersection. It actually flipped over. It says all cities need AI traffic control. This is the type of thing that would prompt a national conversation. We've got some other people talking about mosquitoes, and I'm sure there'll be some pot shots about the cold. And I'm talking to a CEO from Winnipeg from our home studio in Edmonton. I know we can both relate. I mean, I appreciate to this fact that you've not yet mentioned the Jets' sweep of the Oilers in the most recent NHL Stanley Cup playoffs, but soon upon us is NHL free agency. And there will be some swipes and some pot shots from fans of the LA Kings and the Arizona Coyotes and the Las Vegas Golden Knights and all these wonderful climates. And they'll say nobody wants to go to the Oilers. Nobody wants to go to the Jets because it's going to be minus 35 in the winter. It can be frigid cold. How much of an uphill climb is it with regards to some of the perceptions that people from elsewhere on the planet might have about cities that experience the realities of a northern climate?
Yeah. I would tell you that the discussion is changing. But when I came to Economic Development Winnipeg about 5 years ago, there's one rule in my office. We don't talk about potholes, we don't talk about mosquitoes, and we don't talk about the cold. because that's not what this city is about, right? Do we have winter? Sure, we have winter. We have 2 weeks that are probably really cold every single year. But you know what? We have the ability to ski. We have the ability to skate down our rivers in the longest trail in the country. We have the ability to snowshoe and do a bunch of things outdoors. And you can't do that in LA, and it's pretty lousy in Vegas too. So, there's great things that we've got to start celebrating, and there's things that we've got to talk about. And I'll take anybody from those communities, and we can compare NHL teams anytime they want.
Well, I'll tell you, I think that there's something really magic. I mean, we're raising a little guy right now, and I'm talking to him about the magic of experiencing 4 seasons. I personally think there's something absolutely beautiful about a cold front, so long as it doesn't last for 6 months. I think it's absolutely wonderful. How has this translated into, some of your strategy with regards to startups and the entrepreneurial culture and so much? We know that small business drives so much across Canada. Have you seen a strategy or with regards to what you've implemented that's been particularly effective in establishing Winnipeg as a place where startups can thrive really and continue to grow?
We have incredible talent in Winnipeg. So, our first job has been leveraging that talent and making sure that companies, whether they're small startups or bigger companies, understand what talent exists in Winnipeg. And I think that success breeds success. So as we start to see companies that have made it work here, I think of the Skip the Dishes. I think of Ubisoft, the gaming company. I think of even some of our big telecommunications companies like Bell. There's been great strides that have been made in Winnipeg. And I think when you see that and you start to see what's possible, our young entrepreneurs and our young people who want to start up companies have examples to look out for and have an education system that can help them get to that next level. We've seen a lot of growth in the past decade on startups, on our tech community, but we've brought in some big companies that have really been the pillars of that growth and really are a bit of an incubator for talent and kind of have created an ecosystem. Bold Commerce, you talk about what the pandemic has done, and Bold Commerce does all the kind of back end work for Shopify and other online shopping platforms. Ubisoft makes gaming. We've played a lot of video games during a pandemic, and so they've been really successful. Skip the Dishes is a food delivery service started in Winnipeg, based in Winnipeg, and again, they've had some great times throughout this pandemic. So we've got to look at all those things. We've got to figure out how to leverage them. And when we show people that success, when we show people what's possible in Winnipeg, it's amazing what grows out of that.
Yeah. So do you see, when you're talking about the success that can happen here, we've oftentimes had, sort of the conversations around, let me put it this way. I have a T-shirt that says "Still in Edmonton." And I love how it can mean a couple of different things, right? In broadcasting in particular, it was always like, so when are you going to move to Toronto? When are you going to move to Vancouver? When are you going to move to the States? I'm taking a look at this top 7 here of the most intelligent communities in the world, these 7 finalists. I don't see Toronto on the list. I don't see Vancouver on the list. I don't see Montreal on the list. I see Winnipeg. I see Langley. I see Mississauga. What does that say to you, and what does that say to young talent?
I think it says sometimes you got to be nimble. Sometimes small can be big, but you got to do that with creativity. You've got to do that with drive and grit. And if you come together and you bring those communities together, it is amazing what's possible. I go back to the fact that we have this really connected business community. If I have a company that is looking at Winnipeg and they want to come in and see what it's all about, I can pick up the phone and I can call our CEOs. I can call, very high level officials in our government, and I can get them around a table in an afternoon. That doesn't happen in Toronto. That doesn't happen in Montreal. And I promise you it doesn't happen in Vancouver. Those types of bringing people together, that connectivity, that innovation that happens when you can kind of brainstorm with each other, that's what's going to make your city great. And I think, we really leveraged that, and we're really proud of what Winnipeg has done.
Dayna, how much of this requires collaboration, cooperation, support from other levels of government? Are there constant conversations with Premier Pallister and Manitoba's provincial government, the federal government, the Trudeau Liberals, or is this? Is the majority of this really municipally grown?
You know what? I think economic development is a team sport, and so we are always in constant contact with all levels of government. When we're talking about this Intelligent Communities Forum, the city has really been a driver. They've really been a cheerleader for this. This is really important for our mayor and what he wants to leave as his legacy. So they've been really impactful on that. My staff talks to the provincial government every day on, how we get companies here, how we remove barriers to growth. How do we make sure that there are the right policies in place to allow companies to be successful? How do we bring talent here? What does immigration look like? All those things. So it's very much a collaborative effort, but this is something that really economic development is driven and the city's played a big role in.
When you talked about, you talked about stealing some ideas, and I really do oftentimes adhere to that mantra that genius steals. You talked about leaving some bad ideas behind or forgetting about some of the bad ideas. Did you take a look, introspectively at some of the, ways that Winnipeg was operating, or maybe some of the strategies that had been employed, and identify a couple that really weren't working? Did you have to toss out a couple strategies that had been in place for a while? Yeah,
absolutely. When I came to economic development, we talked about Winnipeg's strength as this very diversified economy, right? We never boomed, we never bust. It was fairly consistent. We had this growth rate. You know what? I think that's garbage. I think there are things that we are really good at. There are things that we have a competitive advantage in. And that doesn't mean we're going to have this boom and bust economy. We don't have the same reliance on natural resources or on oil that Alberta has. But we do have areas where we are poised to do great things. And my staff now has to go look at those areas and say, how do we focus our energy here? We don't have unlimited resources. We don't have, hundreds of people to come and do this work. So where do we think we can win? Where are we best positioned to win? And let's put our resources there. That's the mantra that my team uses.
I'm always interested to, and I love talking to CEOs and business leaders because, the mind operates a little bit differently, obviously, when you're steering a team, and that includes where you're locating your corporate headquarters. And there seems to be this belief in Alberta, at least among some political leaders, that the Alberta advantage, so to speak, has everything to do with corporate tax rate. And so as long as Alberta can have the lowest, and I love that you're already shaking your head because there's that same cynicism among the population in Alberta too. I don't think that that's the only, as a matter of fact, I know that that's not the only factor that corporations care about. What do you think actually matters to corporations when they're making choices like where they'll operate?
Yeah. So corporations will always look at the cost of doing business, and that's fair. But I think the corporate tax rate is a very small piece of that. They want access to talent. They want to make sure that they have the people and can hire the people that they need to grow their business. So when you look at what access to talent looks like, what does your post-secondary network look like? What kinds of people are you training? How do you get them, to a point that they are ready to go to work for the businesses that you're trying to attract? I think it also goes back to quality of life. What are your employees going to look at? What do they want to have? We have a relatively small city, but we have professional sports teams. We have a great ballet. We have a symphony. We have theater. We are the cultural cradle of Canada, and all of those things matter. And so I think it's a much broader conversation. And if it was only tax rate, Alberta would be going gangbusters, and I know that that's not the case right now.
Well, we've had some corporations actually pack up and leave, despite the fact that they've seen some of those incentives. Is that an actual phrase that Winnipeg? I haven't heard that before. The cultural cradle of Canada.
Yeah, that's been something that Winnipeg has been called for quite a while. And you go look at our history, right? We have one of the oldest ballets in the country. We've got a symphony. We've got opera. We've got theater. And then we have the Canadian Museum for Human Rights. We have the Winnipeg Art Gallery and the new Inuit Art Center. Yeah. All of those things help contribute to that fabric that is Winnipeg, and it's very, very culturally rich.
It was a couple summers ago. We were out in Winnipeg for a family wedding, and you're going to have to remind me. I'm embarrassed. I can't remember off the top of my head, but it's this stunning hotel, like a heritage hotel. It looks almost like a castle. It's right by the Forks. You know the one I'm talking about?
Yeah, the Fort Garry Hotel.
Exactly.
Fort Garry Hotel.
Oh my gosh, what an experience! And then to walk through the Forks, and our little guy's he at the time he's like 3, so there was not a lot of comprehension there. I couldn't exactly get into who Louis Riel was and what it was all about, but just being able to walk those grounds and walk through the gates and experience it. I mean, it's just, there's something there where I don't know how to describe it except to say that it's palpable. The experience, you can feel it. And I'm not sure that you can manufacture that with infrastructure, but you can certainly capitalize on it. And I think Winnipeg's done a great job with that.
Yeah, thank you. I think that's exactly right. I think that we have to leverage our strengths. We've got to understand what makes us who we are, and then we've got to showcase them. That Forks area is so incredible in the summertime when you can go and, have a beer on a patio and take bikes and ride around and do different things. But in the winter, that is the meeting place for Winnipeggers. We have the longest skating rink in the country on our rivers. We've got skating trails that weave around that park. We've got great restaurants. Sometimes we have restaurants that are right on the frozen river. That's where Winnipeggers go. We have the symphony that goes and plays ice instruments. Those are part of the things that make us unique, and also the part of the thing that, encourages people to come and check out Winnipeg.
I'm starting to realize it's been too long since we've been out to Winnipeg. That's what I'm thinking right now. I think we need to get our butts out there. Dayna, it's been so good. I love it. I can just feel your enthusiasm. So let's put it this way: it's big for 4 out of the last 10 years, Winnipeg to be nominated as one of the 7 most intelligent communities on planet Earth. What would a win mean? I mean, aside from your team, you guys can pop a couple bottles and high fives and it's great. You could take out an ad in the paper or whatever you do to celebrate it. But what would that actually mean to be number one?
You know what? I think that we'll just continue our momentum to make sure that everyone recognizes the work that we've done. We have a high school in Winnipeg called Stisler High School. It's one of the biggest public high schools in the province. There's a few thousand people there. They have some of the best technology courses. They do animation, they do gaming, they do cybersecurity at this high school. And graduates from this high school are able to go all over the world, and they are sought after. And I think, it just continues to build on that momentum. We knew that these were important products. We knew they were important classes that we could offer. And the more that we get that success, the more we understand that, the more our community will continue to do it. And so, I feel pretty good about where we're at this year. And I think that we've made a lot of great strides, and maybe it's our turn to win this thing full on. So we'll see how it goes.
There you go. Well, people can check out more online at intelligentcommunity.org. Again, they've narrowed down their list to the top 7 most intelligent communities in the world. Really neat stuff. You can read about it and the ICF and what they do. I wanted to read you a couple comments before we go. One of them comes in the form of a question on our live chat on YouTube. James says, I grew up in Winnipeg. I moved away because I had better opportunities elsewhere. That's no longer the case. James says, I've applied to jobs in Winnipeg and I would happily move back. So there's one of several, I'm sure. And Tony has a question for you. We'll close with this. Let me ask you, Dayna. Tony says, is Winnipeg successful, do you think, because government is changing with the times? And does Dayna think that maybe that could be replicated in other cities? Would you say that that's an important or key factor?
Yeah, I mean, our government is adapting and they're being pushed, and sometimes they're being dragged along to do the right thing.
Yeah.
I would tell you that the secret to our success is our business community and their ability to work together, their ability to challenge each other and raise each other up and to celebrate successes. I don't see that in a lot of other cities. And I think our business community is leading, and oftentimes they're leading government, but our government has known enough to kind of follow suit and come on board, and they recognize good ideas. So I give them a lot of credit for that.
I think that was a well-answered question. Dayna Spiring is CEO of Economic Development Winnipeg. It's been a real pleasure to connect with you. This is the first time we've spoken. I appreciate your time.
Yeah, great to chat with you this morning. Thanks for having me.
You bet, Dayna. Thanks very much. Interesting stuff. I love that. I'm a big fan of how she answered that, obviously diplomatically, as you would, as CEO of that organization. But the question about, is Winnipeg successful because government's been able to change with the times? You won't find a lot of business representatives, business owners, entrepreneurs, business advocates or advocates for small business or whatever, that will celebrate unless they're looking for grants or unless they're standing up on a stage or behind a podium with a premier or a prime minister or a mayor or what have you. You're not going to find a lot of business people saying our success was made possible because of government. My wiring And feel free to take shots or support me if you like. I'd love to hear your comments, either live on the chat, either via our hashtag RealTalkRJ, or, of course, via an email later on. And we can read those in subsequent days and subsequent shows. talk@ryanjesperson.com. In my mind, business happens when government gets out of the way. Now, that's not to say that regulation doesn't matter. That's not to say like issues like tax structures or incentives or I mean, sometimes you got to dangle a carrot. Government can play a big role in attracting businesses sometimes or working to retain it. But many times I think the sign of an effective government is knowing when to get out of the way. And I think that was telling when Dayna said, sometimes government's got to be pushed or dragged to do the right thing. I mean, when's the last time really that you can look back, and I'd love to hear an example. And if someone can think of one, when's the last time that you can point to a business success story and say this was made possible because of government? I mean, unless you're talking about some sort of huge subsidy, in which case I wouldn't describe it as a really successful business. Although, what are the metrics by how you define success? That's another important question. You can let me know what you think about this. Pushed and dragged to do the right thing. I think that was a great point. Again, you can learn more about the world's 7 most intelligent communities in Vietnam, Russia, Brazil, Australia, 3 of them in Canada at intelligentcommunity.org. The teams at St. Albert and Sherwood Dodge, no, they're not trying to hide it. They know for a fact that selection, well, it's a tall order right now when it comes to inventory, most especially on trucks. Everybody's been out there trying to find something to pull their trailer, their boat, to get outside, but inventory's low across the country. As a matter of fact, North America right now, a lot of people are trading in their year-old trucks for as much or even more than they paid for them. Well, St. Albert and Sherwood Dodge, dealing in both new and certified pre-owned, has better selection than anywhere else, in part because they share their inventories. You can check them out both online under the sponsors tab at ryanjesperson.com. Don't forget as well, they feature the 2021 Jeep lineup, including that Grand Cherokee L. That's the first edition of the Grand Cherokee with that third row of seating. An absolutely magnificent family vehicle. Again, Sherwood and St. Albert Dodge under the sponsors tab at ryanjesperson.com. The team at Park Power wants to remind you, if you use the promo code 2021-Real Talk at parkpower.ca to sign up to bring your internet, electricity, or natural gas order over to them, they're going to give you $70 off your first bill. This is a local business serving clients across the province of Alberta. They've been in business coming up on 10 years now, and they've built up quite a fold. I mean, it's really remarkable to see what they've done, the impact they've made in their communities. You want to talk about businesses making an impact? 10% of their electricity profits, their proceeds, go back to nonprofits in the community, and their customers choose where they go. You'll see what I mean when you sign up at parkpower.ca. Well, of course, we're expecting an announcement, I would say any day now, but it's probably more accurate to say any week now. We don't know when it's going to happen, but a federal election is looming. It's obvious. Candidates are starting to take out leases. Offices are starting to go up, and soon enough, we're going to see lawn signs everywhere. Combine that with municipal elections slated for this October already across the province of Alberta, and the season is upon us. So when it comes to politicking, when it comes to the art of getting your name out there, campaigning, door knocking, what's most effective? Who can ignore the proliferation of election lawn signs? Are they more, though, than just visual pollution? Do they actually work? Donald Green, a professor at Columbia University, has literally written the book on this. He's the author of Get Out the Vote, How to Increase Voter Turnout. Previously a professor at Yale University, where he directed the Institution for Social and Policy Studies. Again, now, as mentioned, Dr. Green, a political science professor at the renowned Columbia University. We're thrilled to have you here, Doc, and thanks for making time for us. Welcome to Real Talk.
Thanks for having me. It's a pleasure to be here.
Is it fair for me to allude to visual pollution? I know a lot of people go, oh, geez, it's election lawn sign season. Here we go.
Well, I think that that the candidates who are involved, place great faith in those signs. And so I think they'd be a little bit offended, but they probably would view their opponent's lawn signs as pollution.
Yeah, very well said. So what turned you on to this in the first place? What was it about election lawn signs that captured your attention?
Well, my colleagues and I have, for more than 20 years now, conducted randomized experiments to evaluate the effectiveness of a variety of campaign tactics. So door knocking, direct mail, phone calls, TV ads, and lawn signs were just, one of a long list. So what would be attractive about lawn signs? Well, in some ways they are, one of the very few things that is affordable for a relatively cash-strapped candidate. So a local candidate running for local office might not have hundreds of thousands of dollars to spend, might not even have tens of thousands of dollars, but might be able to afford lawn signs, and with enough people power from friends and relatives, might be able to plant lawn signs in what we would call precincts. I guess you would call them ridings, in order to try to win over votes. And so the question is, does that do anything for them?
So I guess ultimately the determining factor, when it comes down to it, is whether or not you win the election. That's how you can tell what was most effective. But what are some of the other metrics that you might employ in determining the effectiveness of this?
Well, what we did was the equivalent of a pharmaceutical trial. We randomly assigned lawn signs to some, again, of what we would call precincts, you would call ridings, and not others. And so we did this in a congressional district. We did this in a state house race. We did this in a county race and in a gubernatorial race. And in each case, we got the candidates to put their signs up in certain locations, but not others. And the question was, when you looked at the precinct level vote outcomes, did they get more votes in the places where we randomly planted 40-yard signs? And the answer was, a little bit. It's about 1.7 percentage points. So if you're trailing by 10, it's not going to be enough to win. If you're trailing by 1, maybe.
Yeah, maybe. But even then, not decisive, right? Really, it sounds to me like almost a negligible difference.
Yeah, I think that, certainly if you were hoping that the lawn signs would overcome a big deficit, it's probably too much to ask. But if you were in a competitive area, or if you were running against other relatively unknown candidates and you just needed a bit of a boost, you needed a bit of credibility, maybe lawn signs would do it. I think that lawn signs, have enough oomph so that they might attract, for example, free media coverage, because you're now considered a bit more credible as a candidate. So they're not nothing, but I certainly don't want to say that they're going to work miracles, because they're not.
One of the things I would say, and I'm experiencing this, I was telling a story on the show just a couple of days ago, walking the dog, and I saw a particular house with a particular sign for a particular candidate, and I went, really? You and him? Really? It's a personal endorsement, which is, of course, within the parameters of a community, quite powerful sometimes.
Absolutely. I think that again, I'm not going to exaggerate the effectiveness of that kind of tactic, but to the extent that a person who is relatively well known in the community for certain political views hoists a sign that is a little bit out of step with what you'd expect, I think people, in the community would say, wait a minute, I just learned something.
Do you think that most people are adverse to putting out lawn signs because of, that old premise? I'm not sure it sticks anymore, but people, you don't talk about religion, sex, or politics around the dinner table. Are most people, do you think, adverse to putting out a lawn sign and publicly displaying who they're going to support?
Yes, I think well below half of all households would be willing to do it, even under conditions where they're strongly encouraged. Nevertheless, there are many political people out there, and for example, the residual Trump 2020 signs are still on my block here. So people are quite ardent about their political preferences in some cases, and especially in high salience elections. You
mean people still have their Trump lawn signs out?
Yeah, I wish I could show you the photograph. It's actually on my dog walk every day.
Wow. I feel like there's a lot of layers to that. There's a lot of layers to that, aren't there? So you've written the book, get out the vote, how to increase voter turnout. You didn't just write about lawn signs. I know that, people will lament low voter turnout. I mean, we celebrate if we see 60%, we pretend like that's fantastic. We get really excited that 6 out of 10 people have exercised their right to vote. I feel like every time there's an election, I'll get emails from people saying voting should be mandatory, and they look at other jurisdictions around the world where that is the case. What do you believe is the best way to increase voter turnout?
Well, one of the best ways, is to have an election that people really care about. So the 2020 presidential election was a high watermark in my lifetime, or even my mother or grandmother's lifetime. It was a kind of record-shattering event in many ways. And our most Canadian state, which I guess would be Minnesota, voted at a rate of 80%, which is downright Danish by American standards. So it's not impossible to have high voter turnout. And in American history, you certainly throughout the 19th century had very high rates of turnout. But I think that as you basically wear down the American public with many, many, many elections, they become inured to the idea of not voting, skipping elections. And so in some sense, although the book argues that voting is habit forming, skipping a lot of elections essentially is habit breaking. And so part of the issue here is to get people who think of themselves as voters, they're registered to vote, they're interested enough to register, and they have voted in the past, to want to vote in the upcoming election. And so to the extent that Americans are slackers, it's that they tend to vote at very low rates in municipal elections and midterm elections. And there you have people who think of themselves as voters in presidential elections, not voting at all. And so part of the idea of the book is to make a personal connection to someone or someone you're meeting, and say, this election is really important, and people like us have to stand up and be counted. And that kind of personal invitation really goes a long way.
What are your thoughts on mandatory voting?
It's certainly something that is part of the kind of culture in some places, or at least it became part of the culture in places like Australia. And you could understand how the parties, for example, in Australia, would want to take voter turnout off the table as a political, as basically a political tactic. But there are other places, including the United States, where turnout is viewed with great suspicion by both parties. Neither party trusts the other party to do anything that would either raise or lower voter turnout. And so to the extent that it's embroiled in that kind of partisan struggle, I don't see a time when the United States will ever have compulsory turnout.
Yeah.
No, that said, is it a good system or a bad system? Yeah, it's really kind of hard to tell. I think that the good thing about it is that it certainly allows people from every walk of life to make their voice heard. The bad thing about it is that, basically people who don't particularly care to express an opinion are fined if they don't. So that's the trade-off.
Yeah, I've never really, to be honest, had like a strong feeling on this. I guess I've heard interesting points from, different angles of that argument. People talk about how a census is, for all intents and purposes, mandatory. People talk about how paying taxes is mandatory and how voting should be too. But you alluded to this, Doctor, and I do kind of feel the same way that, part of an election and part of someone's right to vote is their right to abstain. Or if they want to show up, their right to spoil their ballot. I sometimes fear what may be the result of, sending 4 out of 10 people to the polls, something that they're not particularly interested in, that they're not up to speed on, that they're not educated about, and what the result might be. I mean, seems to me to be a bit of an academic exercise more than anything, but it's one of those issues where, to be honest, I don't know if somebody asked me the question I just asked you, how do I feel about mandatory voting? I don't think I could give a decent answer.
It is a very tricky question because you're absolutely right. And there are some states, for example, in the United States that have in their constitution the provision that allows for mandatory voting if the state were to enact it. But, it was just kind of a historical accident that we have mandatory jury duty or mandatory, military duty, but we don't have mandatory voting. And I think that those kinds of things tend to have a lot of staying power. And so part of the reason to have mandatory voting, even if you're only encouraging people to, basically turn in a blank ballot, is that they don't sort of cede democratic governance to somebody else. They think of it as something that they're themselves responsible for. The downside, as you alluded to, is the concern that part of the sort of Achilles heel of democracy is what happens when you have a kind of demagogue who is attractive to voters with a very weak connection to democratic anything. And the fact that those people are kind of floating voters is potentially a kind of wild card in a political system. And there are many instances, including, for example, the election of Jesse Ventura, where a candidate comes out of the blue and is very attractive to people who ordinarily would not vote.
Yeah, no kidding. That'll be the case when Oprah runs for president, right? That's an inevitability, isn't it, in the U.S. at some point?
It's so hard to predict who is going to catch fire, because there are so many instances where moneyed people or celebrities run and just fall flat.
Yeah, no kidding. I wonder if maybe inadvertently you named your next book about 5 minutes ago with the slip of the tongue and voter turnoff. I think that'd be an incredible name for a book, voter turnoff.
That would be a good name.
But there are a lot of people that have lost faith or lost interest or in the process. I mean, in all, there's so much cynicism around politics right now that so many people are just turned off. They don't want any part of it. I hear people say it all the time, whether or not they don't think that their daily life. I mean, I take issue with it. Sometimes I don't voice it, but my life doesn't change day to day depending on who's in leadership, or I couldn't even name who the mayor is or the premier. I don't even know who my representative is. Frankly, I don't even care. Is that something that needs to start? I mean, can you instill that give a rip in young people? I mean, does that need to start in the schools? Is there a way to turn that tide? I mean, is that just part of the reality?
Well, what's kind of funny is that prior to 2016, this is a constant refrain among people like me who teach, politics classes. Students would wonder, what the hell difference it makes whether we elect Tweedledee or Tweedledum. And then Donald Trump's election sort of changed all that. And I think that from that point on, those who previously took the view that who cares, it doesn't make any difference, now took the view that, yikes, better pay more attention.
Yeah, no kidding. So when it comes to the lawn signs in particular, you did a bit of a dive into what made for successful signage, right? I mean, when it comes, we'll see some, there's always the ones you figure people that have the prime properties, they get the big 4 by 6 foot signs on their lawn, right? As opposed to the little placard ones. We'll see the color schemes. We were noting as a team how it's somewhat interesting that color schemes in Canada and the U.S. differ. Typically, blue up here is tried, tested, and true conservative, where it's the opposite. Of course, down in the U.S., it's the number that the Democrats, or rather the color the Democrats use. Size, color, shape, graphic design. Does this stuff factor into which signs are effective and which ones aren't?
I wish I had some hard data on that, but I would say the following, which is one of the funny things about lawn signs of the size that you just depicted is how vacuous they are, right? They almost say nothing other than the candidate's name and maybe what they're running for, but there's really almost no content to them. And so one of the questions is, would you be better off if you had a slogan or something about you that was at least vaguely memorable? Some kind of stance. And I don't think that's really been tested, although in one of our experiments, there was a message. There was it was basically a kind of anti-incumbent message. And, that seemed to work. And I wouldn't say that's the only thing that would work, but it's kind of an interesting commentary on maybe the margin for innovation in the world of science. To actually put content in them.
Yeah. I mean, isn't it funny that, I guess I understand it in the sense that when you take a look at billboards, electoral or otherwise that are effective, typically they're not ones with a ton of text and a ton of information. They're ones that kind of get to the point and they're punchy, but really when you're walking around looking at election signs, especially right now, in our neck of the woods, there are municipal elections coming up. People are going to be voting for city councilors and school board trustees and things like that. There's no party affiliation on a lot of those. There may be implied affiliation, but there's virtually no information on the candidate's platform. It still requires a proactivity.
That's right. It'd be kind of interesting if, for example, a candidate were to say, something about their experience or something about their long term, they were born and raised in the community or whatever it is that they want to say, and in 3 words or less. It's just kind of an interesting commentary that they almost are never advised to do that. And thinking back to your dog walking example, if somebody's hoisting a sign in their own yard and somebody's walking by it, not driving by it, there's no reason you couldn't have a little bit of content.
Yeah, no kidding. Do you think that much has changed since when you wrote the book? I mean, 2015, there's a whole lot that's changed in politics, both in the United States and around the world, quite frankly. Do you think that campaign tactics or the art of electioneering or however you'd want to put it, has it changed drastically in the 6 years?
Well, the first edition of that book was way back in 2004 when dinosaurs roamed the earth, and the last edition was 2019. I would say that the one thing that has changed the most is that telephones, at least in the United States, have really changed as a vehicle for communicating. It is, the laws have changed in the United States, making it illegal to auto dial cell phones, and just in general, people are not all that receptive to having their cell phones called by strangers. So that tactic has largely been replaced by various forms of text messaging. And what's kind of interesting about that is things change, but then things don't change. Yes, text messaging was a relatively unknown thing back in 2004, but the impersonal features of text messaging are also what largely prevent them from having much of an effect. And interestingly, the more effective forms of text messaging are friend-to-friend messages, which seem to be quite effective. And so in that sense, it's basically an instantiation of one of the main themes of the book, which is the more personal, the more effective.
When it comes to conversation around voter suppression, and I'm not sure how much the average citizen would be able to talk about this, but it certainly is a very real trend and a very real issue. A lot of eyes on the state of Georgia, as if I need to tell you, over the past year, and their voting bill, which was described by a lot of columnists that I saw as an assault on democracy. Do you think that there's enough of a public awareness, let alone a public conversation about voter suppression?
Well, I would say that to the extent that there is a conversation about ballot security or other kinds of things, the public tends to be supportive of crackdowns and requirements that of the voter identification sort. I don't know that they have any particular views about whether you can give people water while they're waiting in line, or how long the early voting period should be. But I would say that certainly the public, though supportive of voter security, is hostile to the idea of voter intimidation. And so dirty tricks of the form, telling people to vote on a day other than the election, that's widely regarded as, underhanded. I think that what's kind of interesting about the kind of way the American political divide has come down on this is that, both parties are probably wrong about the extent to which these kinds of changes in the law are going to affect voter turnout. Just in general, the hue and cry that went up when voter identification requirements were made more and more and more stringent, that this is going to reduce voter turnout. Well, I don't think that there's any evidence for that, actually, in retrospect. It might have been a concern ex ante, but I think ex post, no, it's not really a concern. And in this particular case, I would say that the relevant laws in places like Georgia that are concerning are not really the ones having to do with how people vote or the specifics of the early voting period or vote by mail. They really have to do more with the role of state officials riding herd over localities, and also who gets to declare a victory in the state. Those are, in some sense, unnoticed, almost constitutional changes in the way in which states operate.
I'm seeing some chatter with members of our live audience right now around the concept of strategic voting, and I'm curious to know where you land on this. I know that a lot of people, it's editorializing for me to say people overthink their vote, because who's to determine that, and what would define an overthink? But I know a lot of people think, well, I might typically vote for this candidate or this party, but it looks like this candidate and this party's surging, and I think actually way over here, a party that might be unlikely for me to support could be the best party to dethrone this one. And so they're going to vote for the party they don't typically vote for to avoid a vote split, or exactly what I'm talking about here. Do you have thoughts on so-called strategic voting? Do you think it's a dangerous road to hoe?
Well, it is one of those cases where, first of all, I would say Americans are largely innocent of strategic voting because we tend to have
choices,
two choices. But,
yeah.
but in primaries, you sometimes see it. But surprisingly, you don't see it very much, right? You don't typically see people abandoning their first choice for a more viable second choice or third choice. I mean, sometimes it happens, but by and large, it happens because people are largely indifferent. And part of what's going on is a third or a fourth choice is surging in the media, getting a lot of attention, not attracting strategic votes so much as just notice for candidates who would otherwise go unnoticed. So I would say that in the American context, we're pretty bad at studying this, but I would say that to the extent that people do it, it tends to be people kind of at the top of the food chain in terms of how interested they are in politics. So they're watching the polls and they're thinking, I don't want to waste my vote. I think the ordinary voter really votes sincerely.
Do you think a two-party system is better than I don't know if it's fair for me to call it a mishmash, but I'm up here, depending on the election and depending on what level of government you're talking about, you might have 7 or 9 options on a ballot. And a lot of these might be progressives or conservatives or left-leaners that will all of a sudden have 3 options based on slight nuance to policy, as opposed to Republicans and Democrats. You're one or the other. Do you have a system that you think actually serves the public better?
Well, I think the problem is that it sort of all depends on what you want. If what you want ultimately is gridlock, the two-party system we have is wonderful. We have a federal system with lots and lots of points of vetoes for all kinds of intense minorities. And so if you never want to see, gun rights or gun control legislation or any particular thing on this, that, or the other topic, America is really the place for you. So if you want to see bureaucratic incrementalism as a form of politics, two-party system was wonderful. If, on the other hand, you're hoping that when a new election happens and a new party is swept into office, that they get down to business and actually start changing things, our system is not that great because it's not a unitary system in the first place, but it's also not ultimately a programmatic system in the same way. So it's just a different kind of kettle of fish. I think that the good thing about a multi-party system is that you can kind of evolve with coalitions in a somewhat more orderly way, whereas our coalitions are somewhat disorderly, and which ones end up becoming, it's not as though we have portfolios that we allocate across a parliamentary regime. We just kind of let the president start choosing people. And so I think that the things that people probably like about a multi-party system are probably askew from other aspects of government, like how much does federalism play a role, and how much do checks and balances play a role. So again, as I say, it's all sort of dependent on where you stand. If you're part of a small minority group and you want to have a legislator who is going to basically be your spokesperson, even in a small minority, well, then a multi-party system is for you. Because that person would be kind of overwhelmed in a two-party system. But, if on the other hand, you want to be part of a big tent, maybe a two-party system is a little bit better. But when you lose, you're going to say, I'm just so close to getting a victory that all I need is just a little bit more attraction to people who really don't share my views at all. And that's the That's the problem. But of course, that's a problem even in multi-party systems, as in the case of Israel.
Yeah, I mean, absolutely. We've seen from time to time flare up around discussions about lowering the voting age. Most recently, I mean, I did some interviews a while back, people talking about how they believe that if you can drive a car, if you're old enough to be behind the wheel of a vehicle, if you're 16 years old, you should be able to vote in a federal election. Do you have thoughts on that, on the appropriate age and what might go into that decision?
Well, I don't think there's any kind of clear standard, right? Because on the one hand, we think, well, 16-year-old is a citizen, and why shouldn't a citizen have a say? You could say, well, they need to be an adult, but it's not clear what it is about adulthood per se that should be relevant to your franchise. Is that you're better informed? I mean, maybe you're better informed, maybe you're not when you're older. So it's kind of an ambiguous, slippery slope anyway. But I would say that one of the things that might be attractive to those who are interested in having young people vote is the idea that they could form voting habits early. Because if you said, who are the lowest voting segments of society, typically they're young people. They tend to vote at very low rates, in part because voting is a kind of habit-forming thing, and they're not going to form a kind of consistent voting habit typically until their late 20s. And then they'll be relatively consistent voters after that, maybe even culminating in their late 70s, late 80s. So getting them on that path to habit formation might be a good thing. But the problem with that is, are you putting them on the habit of voting path or the habit of not voting path? Because very few 16-year-olds, even when enfranchised, actually do vote.
Yeah, and that probably has a lot to do with discussion within the home too, right? I mean, if you're being raised by a parent that is absolutely cynical about this and that's not made it a priority to vote, and it's not a really big thing, then who knows? I mean, obviously sometimes kids can break the mold. I think other times, you see parents that bring their kids in with them. It's a big deal on voting day or the advanced polls, and it's almost like a family thing where we go and we do this. We exercise our right. I mean, people. I don't want to use the word dramatic, but I mean, people can feel very strongly about people died for for us to have the right to vote. I mean, this is our responsibility, and obviously, I think that instills values in a young person as well.
Well, those kinds of values would doubtless be instilled at any age. And part of the concern, I guess, with having young people vote, say at 16, is that it even further accentuates what in the United States would be a socioeconomic skew. People who hear about politics around the dinner table are not exclusively upper socioeconomic status, but they are disproportionately so. And so part of the concern is that if you basically have 16-year-olds vote, they will be typically 16-year-olds from well-heeled political families.
Yeah. So all of this conversation leads us to this. Could have been my first question to you, but I'll make it the last. Do you display a lawn sign leading up to an election, Doctor?
The boss, the decision maker in my family displays the lawn sign, and she's very pleased to do that every election. I try to be on the science team, and so I do experiments with both sides of the aisle, and so I applaud whatever is decided, but I don't actually engage in political activity directly.
You maintain your objectivity.
Indeed.
There you go. Dr. Donald Green is a political science professor at Columbia University, author of Get Out the Vote, How to Increase Voter Turnout. You can find that anywhere you find great books. Professor, it's been wonderful to speak with you today, and thanks for making time for us.
Thanks for having me.
You bet. Interesting stuff. There's a lot to break down there. Election signs, age, voter suppression, two parties or more. Hoyles, do you put up election signs on your lawn?
No.
Is there a reason behind it? Can I ask? Is it personal?
In the line of work that I am in, I feel that objectivity, people can make assumptions about what my political leanings are, but I don't, I do not align myself publicly because I feel like it could, there have even been job opportunities in my past where they were politically aligned, and I'm just not comfortable. I'm not willing to put my name under the certain column because I think that, long term it would be detrimental.
Yeah.
So
I'm
no,
the, I'm
no
the
sign.
same way. I mean, I think maybe as a talk host, a little bit different. Well, it's definitely a bit different than as a sort of a black and white journalist, right? Where you would say somebody covering an election, for example, reporting on an election should obviously not have lawn signs. Should obviously not be discussing who they would vote or let alone endorsing anybody. Now maybe a little bit different, but I feel quite the same way. Obviously, I vote. Or I shouldn't even say obviously I vote, because who knows? I mean, there's a lot of people. I remember the last election. I got this sticker, and it's like, I voted, and you like wear it and post the photo, and I don't know. It's somewhat of a self-congratulatory exercise, but in an effort to communicate to people that that's part of your values, and that you believe that it's important to vote, and you hope that everybody votes. Although sometimes I hope that some people don't vote. When you recognize how little some people care and how little some people are invested in the process, and how little research or reading people have done or digging, and then you get a little bit concerned. I've joked that the problem with democracy is that everybody gets a vote. But seriously, I will talk to friends that we're like, "What's up with the sticker?" Oh, is the election's today? Is it today? And you go, man, come on.
Yeah.
But not everybody shares that conviction. And
I have to admit, actually, now I need to recant and say that I have put up a political poster or put up a lawn sign, and I had to make it myself, and it just said vote. Because to me, I don't care. I do not care who you vote for. I do not care.
yeah,
But it's been drilled into me that it is my duty. It's my civic duty to vote.
yeah.
Get your butt there. I don't care what time Sarah Hoyles. Get there.
I love the passion. I can feel it through the plexiglass.
Well, it's about community, and you have to be invested, and you have to contribute. This is my job.
You saw that with regards to the most recent American election, and all the celebrities coming out, and they were like, it's like Biden v. Trump, and they're going, we don't care who you vote for. Just vote. But it's like all the Hollywood celebrities. We don't care who you vote for, but please vote.
Vote for Biden.
And if you do vote for Biden, that's right. I'm curious to know where Real Talkers will land on this. Michelle says, there's voters who don't care about democracy still being invited by the demigod, referencing the comment from Dr. Green there. Still being invited to municipal elections by way of baloney referendum questions. Fair point. That's a fair point for sure.
Speaking of baloney referendums, we have a guest coming up on Tuesday, August 3rd, talking about the daylight savings time referendum.
Ooh.
Yeah, a prof out of the UFC. So talk about that. That's on the docket.
Is the can you give us a hint? Is the premise or the jumping off point of the interview that question is baloney or is not baloney? Because I think for a lot of people, a change to daylight savings time is actually something that they would quite care about. And I've talked to some agricultural producers, for example, that'll say like the milking cows get all thrown out of whack when daylight savings time happens. I don't know if that's a real thing or not. Some people are really sluggish, or they'll say that it affects I just like using the word, their circadian rhythm.
And that is precisely what we'll be talking about, and how it actually affects people day to day, pros and cons choices, to help educate the public before the referendum. And I guess that to that point, the idea that, voting is important because it actually informs, what happens in your day-to-day life. And I truly believe that municipal elections are the most important because that's the stuff that happens in your day-to-day life, in your community, in your city. It's vital. And you can have the most impact, really. And you can actually engage with that person because they are in your community. They live there and they serve there. So, wow,
I like it. I like it. Don't dial it back one bit, my friend. I love it. I think you could also make the argument that, and I do agree with you. I mean, I think municipal politicians, city councilors, aldermen, whatever it is in your region, they're the ones that They're the ones that when they're filling up their cars with gas or when they're locking up their bikes at the bike racks, when they're at the grocery store or walking their dog or they're at the soccer field or they're at the local patio or whatever, they're the ones whose constituents are coming up to them all the time. They're the ones that are having to answer questions about garbage pickup and snow plowing and community programs and rec centers getting built and all of, transit expansion and everything else that, like you said, is everyday kind of stuff. And whereas, provincial and federal politicians, number one, might not spend a lot of time in their riding. Number two, might not be as accessible to the public all the time. And number three, really, especially with federal politics, your member of parliament, for example, here in Canada, how much is your member of parliament actually really representing you and your riding in the House of Commons? The answer would be almost never. Right? When you take a look at how a party might whip votes, for example, whether it would acknowledge that it is or not, is your member of parliament on a bill around conversion therapy or on whatever, as a matter of fact, on a bill about anything? How many times is your member of parliament saying, what do the people of Lac St. Anne want? Or what do the people of Thunder Bay want? Or what do the people in Gander want? Or what does party leader say? What does the whip say? What's our party's position on this? And I'd be curious to know how people determine whether or not they feel like they're well represented at a provincial or a federal level versus when you're talking municipal politics, you better believe people are keeping an eye on which way their city councilor votes on something, right? Like hell, we believe that. Like hell, our community votes that way. And I think that there is that more direct accountability. I also think that on the flip side, when it comes to municipal politics, I think that the onus is more on the electorate to do more research because it's a little easier to be lazy and vote at other levels. You're either for or against, the Conservatives or for or against the Liberals or for or against the NDP. Right? You either buy into, I was going to say the Green Party, but what a hot garbage fire that is right now. Can you believe what happened? I hate to even put it this way because it makes it sound like we caused it, but almost literally right after Annamie Paul joined us on the show for what I thought was an incredible interview. We talked to her for 45 minutes or something like that about all kinds of stuff. About how it was a new opportunity for the Green Party and how she's planning on growing her base and how she was going to win an election right in the heart of Toronto. And then all of a sudden, her membership's under review. The party's looking to push her out. That's unbelievable there. But I digress. I'm going down a rabbit hole.
We've got an ask in for her to bring her back. They said they'll do their best at this point. So,
I suspect the answer will be no, but you know what? If and when she's gone, that's maybe when she'll talk. We'll see.
Yeah.
I don't know. To get a peek behind the curtain on what's going there would be fascinating. But my point is, it's a little bit easier to play team sports at the higher levels of government, at provincial and federal politics, because you can either, a lot of people will vote for the color code, right? My dad always voted blue or my mom always voted orange, so that's the way I vote. Whereas when it comes to voting for a city councilor, it requires, unless you're going to be influenced by something like lawn signs. Well, I get along with, Mrs. Jones over there and, Mr. Strachan over there, and they've got their signs up and they both are voting for the same person. And, that sounds like a good choice to me. The headshot on the lawn sign doesn't, they look trustworthy. They don't appear to be particularly offensive. I'm going to vote for them. But man, they're voting to close down the school in your ride. They're voting to, they're voting against certain initiatives like school lunch programs or something that might be good for your kids. It requires a little bit of digging. And I guess I just hope maybe that shows like this, that this podcast will, inspire people to talk to their friends and to ask simple questions. It can be a little bit sensitive. Who are you voting for?
Oh, yeah.
Maybe a question like, have you put some thought into it, or have you done some digging, or have you done any research leading up to this election? I hope that people have those conversations because, elections really do matter.
They do. Did your folks share with you who they were voting for?
We had massive lawn signs. We had the corner property with the big lawn signs. There was no There was no doubt. There was no question. Yeah. But my parents are also very private people.
Yeah.
You know, like I can't remember, there wasn't like a ton of talk about politics, but I grew up in such a fascinating, an interesting, South Calgary in the 1980s and 90s it was almost a given, it felt like. But I never do think stuff like salary or earnings or things like that. Those were never discussed.
Yeah, that my folks never shared what they made at work, but I never knew I still to this day don't know what they vote.
Yeah.
They're like, it's none of your beeswax. You know your beeswax? How about you mind it? Yeah.
But that's been and to a certain degree that's true, and I totally respect that. You'll notice like in an interview, if I ever it's a very sensitive question, but sometimes it's relevant where you'll be talking to somebody and it matters who they voted for. Do you mind me asking, who'd you vote for last election and would you vote for that party again? That's oftentimes a very telling question, and it's a relevant question, but it's also a very sensitive question. And I would never blame somebody for saying, I'm not going to divulge that information, right? I think there's a lot of people that probably go to the polls and they walk in being like, yeah, that candidate. And then they get in there like, yeah, right. Are you kidding me? And there's no way they're voting for that candidate, but they just don't want to deal with it. They don't want to deal with the blowback. They're not going to put out an election sign for the person they're actually going to vote for because they know that some yahoo down the street's going to egg their house in the middle of the night and they're just not going to deal with it. Right?
Did you hear about the lawn signs that got burnt in Nova Scotia?
No.
Yeah, it's the only black candidate, and within hours of the lawn signs going up, one was burnt, one is missing, and one was defaced.
I don't even know what to say. Stuff like that, I'm just like... Silver Screen Wanderer on the live chat says, Ryan, whenever I try to talk politics with my friends, it always turns into awkward silence. None of them want to engage in those conversations. How do I change that? It's frustrating. I get it. I totally get it. First of all, I love that there's an appetite to change it. You know what I think it might be? I think what matters most with elections when it comes to voter turnout and when it comes to inspiring people, it's finding an issue that matters. And that's a lot of times what candidates will do too. I saw somebody noted earlier Doug Ford's Buck a Beer slogan, which became something that, Sam, you just reacted to that one. That was one, for a lot of people. I bet you, I'm not going to say a majority of people. I bet you 1 to 5% of voters turned out just based on Buck a Beer.
Well, Doug Ford is a masterful campaigner for exactly that reason. You can't discount Doug Ford's sort of inherent folksiness and how he knows how to leverage that. So, say what you will about Doug Ford, Buck a Beer was a spectacular campaign point.
Yeah, it was. But it also makes him vulnerable, right? Because when you have those slogans that really attach themselves to the public, once your government starts to falter, or once you start to fail as a leader, then it'll be used against you, right? Oh, did a lousy job during whatever, but hey, Buck a Beer. And then I think that the pithiness of the initiative is exposed, right? Penny here says, I used to secretly vote ABC, which I think Penny probably means anybody but conservative. I think that's probably what that means. She says, I had to because my ex, in other words, she did it secretly, because my ex would have pitched a fit all over me. That's what I'm talking about. I think that some people may portray or at least allow themselves to be understood a certain way. Then when they go into the ballot box, boom, they actually vote the way that they want to.
As they should.
Troy said, when I first moved down to Calgary, I didn't know anything about municipal candidates, so I just drove through. This is a big swipe at the beautiful neighborhood of Mount Royal. Troy says, I used to just drive through Mount Royal to look at the lawn signs to know who not to vote for. Hey, lawn signs can be effective in more ways than one, right, Troy? Hawes says, talking politics with friends is mostly a waste of energy. I'm either preaching to the choir or I'm trying to change somebody that will never change. Rarely is there an in-between. And I think that that's a fair point, too, from Hawes. Do you believe, do people actually change their minds on anything? I've been watching some developments on Twitter, and people arguing about certain things. I'm like, when's the last time? As a matter of fact, I know when the last time is I've seen it. It's been in our chatterbox and it's been on the Real Talk RJ hashtag, because there's something strangely wonderful about this Real Talk community where people show up in fellowship every single day with open minds, and people I think are willing to consider other viewpoints. We've had some guests on the show that have been unpopular to some people. People have heard them out, considered the points they've made. Sometimes I'm sure it's made an impact on people's perspectives, and sometimes it's solidified people's resolve, which is great as well. But outside of the conversations on this show, I literally cannot think of the last time, in particular on social media, that I saw people taking swipes at one another or exchanging ideas with one another, and someone has said, you know what, you just changed my mind.
I don't know about on social media per se, but I mean, look at residential schools and how there was, a lack of understanding, a lack of awareness of what they truly were. And now the sentiment is shifting. It can change, but I don't think it's the short game. I think it's the long game.
Yeah. How about this from Jerry, who says, my mom just votes for whoever my dad tells her to.
Oh, that breaks my heart.
Jerry, I hope that I pronounced that correctly. Tried to really roll it. You know what I mean? You can let us know what you think about this and what you've just heard. I know that there was a lot to unpack with what the good Dr. Donald Green brought to us. I thought that was a fascinating conversation and a great get, by the way. Former Yale professor, now at Columbia. I'm all over that interview. That was good stuff. And again, you can find his book, Get Out the Vote, How to Increase Voter Turnout. Written by an American, sure, but some of the policies would certainly, or some of the ideas would hold true there. We wanted to remind you that coming up on Friday, we will be featuring a little something we call Trash Talk. It's an opportunity for you to get something off your chest. And we're encouraging more and more, and yeah, I'm spelling it out, fewer political trash talks. It's totally okay. But every week we choose from, I don't know, on a slow week, 75, and on a big week, 500 emails. People just furious about politics, and that's totally fine. But I'd love to see you blow off some steam about takeout that shows up cold. Or sushi delivered to your door without soy sauce. Or somebody selling you a mountain bike without letting you know that the gears are all messed up and the tires leak. Or people that don't pick up the poop at the dog park. Gum under picnic tables. Margaritas that melt too quickly.
People who leave their sound on their phones going while they're typing in public.
Ah.
Oh my God, that is like...
People who call when you text them.
Yes!
Maybe we should just riff on trash talk. Do you have one off the top of your head, Sam? I mean, this is a cathartic exercise here. Is there anything you'd like to get off your chest right now?
Oh, boy.
Look,
People that don't refill ice cube trays. I loved that one from a couple weeks ago.
Yes.
Honestly, that one still sits with me.
I felt like there was kind of like a family thing going on with that submission, that trash talk submission. What was it? The email correctly was something like, because I know that my partner will be watching this. And then I think it wasn't like, don't use my real name. It was something like along those lines.
I like that we're getting involved in domestics. That's great.
Yeah, I mean, like, not like domestics, but domestics. Yeah. Hey, we're happy to be of service when we can. The whole point of all of this was to remind you that Trash Talk is presented by the team at Local Waste. They love talking trash. They've been doing it for a quarter century. If you check out their website right now, localwaste.ca, you can see the contact information there for their headquarters in Edmonton and Regina as well. It's a company that continues to grow. So yeah, they'd love to do business with you if you need waste services, but also if there's an entrepreneur out there, you see a void, you see an opportunity in your community to get Local Waste out there. Chris, Mikkel, Lauren, they'd love to talk to you. You can find them online at localwaste.ca. We also wanted to remind you that this team is powered, this studio, by Westworld Computers. As a matter of fact, I was talking to Daryl just yesterday. We've got needs as we continue to grow as a team, and they're helping us meet those needs, and they can do the exact same for you, whether it's your household or your business. For more than 40 years, they've been earning the return business of their customers because of what they offer as an independent, family-owned business. You can check out the new iMac lineup right now at westworld.ca. They'll ship across Canada, and of course, that's also where you can book your service appointments. Westworld Computers at westworld.ca. Before we get to our next interview, we should probably check in on this morning's unscientific, unofficial Twitter poll. Now this is not necessarily directly, I think, what author Sarah Everts was looking to get into with her New York Times recommended book, The Joy of Sweat. However, we could not resist the opportunity to ask you, when looking for a partner for the night or forever, which scent impacts you most? We gave you the opportunity to select natural musk, simple, freshly showered, subtle perfume or cologne, or other. By a long shot, simple, freshly showered is the majority win to this point. With 22 hours left in the poll, we can revisit this tomorrow morning. 55% of you go in there. 35% prefer a subtle perfume or cologne. Just under 7% are fans of the natural musk, which is an earned scent, and 3% are voting for other. Jessica says scent is so important. Carly, who can blame Carly for voting for the subtle scent of a 3 a.m. sampler from Denny's lingering on the lips and fingertips? Wonder if she might be, is that maybe the moons over my hammy? Or maybe another famed dish from the longtime provider of late night eats? Now, we do have a vote from Will Kahn for Sex Panther. Of course, one of the great products available via the movie Anchorman. 60% of the time, it works all the time. Jen says, I love my hubby's sweat smell, so that'll be a vote for natural musk. Natural musk, she says, for her all the way.
That is like bang on. When I'm first dating somebody, I want the fresh scent. But then once you like get to know somebody and you're like,
yeah,
then the musk. So like, I guess I'm in the depends.
Well, and it probably
category.
depends on how the musk has been earned, right? I mean, if it's the musk of someone that's been on the couch for 3 days, crushing Doritos, playing World of Warcraft, that might not be the musk you're looking for. However, if it's the musk of someone who's just rototilled your garden, who's just planted a few trees in your name that will one day bear the swings for your young child to perch upon, that type of a musk might be irresistible.
This is not the musk you're looking for.
What a lead-in for Sarah Everts, who is going to have, I don't know what's going to go on here. She's an award-winning science journalist. We're leading into this with a non-scientific poll to talk to a science journalist based out of Ottawa. She teaches science journalism. How cool is that? At Carleton University, she's got a brand new book, The Joy of Sweat, The Strange Science of Perspiration. The New York Times put it on their must-read list for the summer of 2021. It's out right now. You can find it anywhere you get good books. Sarah, welcome to the show, and thanks for being here this morning.
It's my pleasure. I want to know what the other category is. That's what I need to know. Like, all the people who picked other, what kind of other?
Yeah. Well, Carly kind of steered us in that direction, audience member, with her idea of the lingering scent of a Denny's breakfast, a 3 a.m. Denny's breakfast. That might be it. I know for some people, the smell of cigarettes is an absolute turnoff, whereas for somebody else, it may be a turn on. I mean, the heavy scent of a cigar coming off the golf course. I don't know. I've just always found that with these unscientific polls, typically if you put other on there, you'll get some pretty great comments. I mean, that's the peek behind the curtain, to be honest with you. How did this get on your radar? I mean, you literally wrote a book on the joy of sweat. Where did this journey begin for you?
So, I think like most people, I'm slightly mortified by my own sweat. I worry that I might sweat too much when I'm like doing a workout. I am reaching for the towel during the warm up. And so I, thought, God, I'm also a science journalist. So I know that like evolutionary biologists count humanity's ability to sweat as one of our, very unique superpowers in the animal kingdom. So I thought, okay, I need to dig in more and find a little bit of serenity rather than shame in all the sweating that I certainly do.
Yeah. But because okay, I can relate, and I'll just put it out there for you, and I'll meet you in the middle on this one, because I'm a sweater. And sometimes it's a real problem because when I start, I can't stop. And oftentimes it's when I'm wearing a tuxedo in a hot room with 1,500 people and I'm behind a podium with spotlights blasting on me and there are huge screens behind me amplifying the image and I can see the bead of sweat on my forehead. And I'm going, uh-oh. Because we all know what happened to Richard Nixon in the TV debates. As soon as he started sweating, it was over for him because it says something, right? The public reads into it.
Yeah, but that's like manufactured humiliation, right? That's like 100 years of deodorant and antiperspirant advertising that says that, you should be socially isolated if you don't buy our products, or that threatens social isolation. And yeah, sure. I do get that sweating is completely out of our control. And I think that's why we hate it so much, in part, because, you think about other things that are embarrassing, like burping or farting, and you can kind of remove yourself briefly from a social situation to let that happen, but when your body gets the cool down directive, there is nothing stopping those floods from coming out. So it's out of our control. Humans don't like that.
You're right, and we do, whether we realize it or not. I mean, it's a heavy word to use with judge. But we do judge someone, or at least perceive somebody a certain way. For example, if we see sweat rings under their armpits, right? In a meeting or in a social setting, there's a certain, it's mortifying perhaps for the person, or maybe not, but as members of the public, we almost read into it. Do you think that, is that the source of it? Is it marketing and advertising, do you think, or was this a thing before that?
So I do think that people were worried about body odor. There's like hilarious poems in like the ancient Roman era saying, the reason she will not lie beneath you is because of your armpits, they smell like a goat. So there's like, I think, there's always been some stigma about BO, but for most of human history, we've, managed it with a little soap and water, as well as, a dab of perfume. But 100 years ago, when the first deodorants and antiperspirants are coming out, nobody wants to buy them because they think, we don't need it. And, it's unhealthy to curb sweat is like the kind of attitude at the time. But, a very famous marketing firm called J. Walter Thompson is hired by this like high school girl named Edna Murphy, who wants to sell a product called Odor Oh No. And, she can't sell it. And so when she hires J. Walter Thompson, who put a copywriter who had been a former traveling Bible salesman on the job of trying to convince Americans and Canadians actually to buy Odor Oh No, because nobody really was buying this stuff. They did this strategy called whisper copy, which you'll see in literally every advertisement today. And so they take out this big ad, and it's a beautiful arm of a woman, and she's dancing with a man, and it says, "In the curve of a woman's arm." And it goes on to say, this should be a beautiful, dainty thing, but dear Lord, it's not. And in there is, odor, people are gossiping about you, and worst of all, you're not going to get a man. And, it's 1919 and, people are so offended by this that they cancel their subscription to Ladies' Home Journal where this appeared. But at the same time, sales for Odor Oh No skyrocket. And then literally all the other products take on this strategy that effectively say, if you're not going to buy deodorant or antiperspirant, you're going to be unloved. And also you're going to lose your job. So when they finally decide to start targeting men, it's the Depression by this time, it's the 30s, and they're like, dudes, you are, stinky. Nobody's going to tell you that you are. And if you sweat in the boardroom, you're going to, lose your job or a career opportunity. And so, yeah, it's this like manufactured humiliation that makes it a $75 billion industry. And yes, sure. I'm not like an anti-deodorant activist. I put this stuff on too, because I get tired of my own pong and others. But I do it in recognition that this is something that I've been told to do by marketers, and my body is just really trying to cool down. Like, seriously, it's trying to keep me alive. And thank you, body.
I know that we've just met, and so this is somewhat of a strange way to take this conversation. By the way, on a side note, Jill's watching this morning, and she's just chimed in again on what other might qualify on the poll. And she says new car smell. If they've just bought you a Jag to drive you around, and the new car smell can be very popular under the other sense. But to my point, there's something about the smell of your own odor that, I think to when I'm out hiking in the backcountry for a week with the fellas. It's an annual tradition. And we could probably talk about farts too if we wanted to really get lowbrow in this conversation. People feel differently about the smell of their own than the smell of others. But sometimes if I kind of give my pit a little bit of a whiff on day 3 of a backcountry hike, as appalling as that might be, were I to be in a fancy restaurant or a business meeting, in the backcountry, to me, it's nice. It's like an accomplishment, right? It says something. Does our sweat tell us something?
Oh, yeah, it does, actually. So you have your own body odor print. You smell your own delicious way, just like I do. So much so that a dog can track you, right, as it can track me just based on a T-shirt. And, the funny thing about body odor is that we do communicate with other humans using smell. And, one of my favorite examples of this was a study done by a group out of Israel, and they videotaped people meeting for the first time. So if you think about most human greetings, they involve, getting close up to somebody, whether it's a cheek kiss, a bow, a hug, or a handshake, where you actually literally get hands-on collection of somebody else's body odor. So anyway, they do this study where they videotape people meeting for the first time. And after they shake each other's hands, the subjects are they're sniffing their hands, and nobody believed that they had done this. It was an unconscious reaction. So much so that they, some of the subjects accused the scientists of having deep faked the videos, but they hadn't. And, we learn all sorts of interesting things. We learn to identify the people that we love. Parents can identify newborns just hours after birth. Siblings can identify each other's BO print after they haven't seen them for years. And humans can do all sorts of interesting information collection. So we can sniff out when others are anxious, because when we're nervous, we produce a particularly strong pong. There's all sorts of ways in which we are assessing each other this way, for better or for worse. And by the way, that handshake study has ruined handshakes for me, but it's made people watching at parties and conferences way more interesting.
Yeah. Well, the art of the handshake, let me say the tradition of the handshake, between what you've just told us and then the pandemic too. I had an awkward interaction with someone the other day, and I had actually sort of made a conscious decision. I actually thought about, I'm talking in a half a second, but I actually thought, and I was like, because we've been doing the elbow pound for a while, and then I kind of got sick of that. It just seemed theatrical and ridiculous. And then we started going with the fist pound, right? And then I was like, for some reason, I saw a friend I hadn't seen in a while, and in the extension of the arm, I start like this, and then in the extension, I was like, no, I'm going for the shake. But it was going to be one of my first shakes in a year and a half, literally. And so I'm approaching him. I start with the fist and I evolve into the shake, and he kind of is with the fist, and I put the hand over the and it was awkward, and we had this laugh, and we ended up clasping hands. He told me it was the first time he'd shaken hands in a year and a half. For me, it was at least one of the few. And we had this conversation about whether or not handshakes will ever come back. Do you think they will? Or do you think we've kind of moved on? There's going to be some residual impact from this pandemic. Do you think handshakes might be one of the things to fall?
I wonder. It is kind of a gross thing. People don't wash their hands after they use the bathroom. We know this. And like, it's kind of gross. And I've enjoyed not having a cold, like I was lucky enough to not get COVID, but I also haven't had like a normal cold. And, I think touching people's hands is probably, maybe it'll go out of style. But, it's funny because you were reminding me of like, I don't know if you've ever done the cheek kiss thing, but if you don't know which side to start on or how many there's going to be, you can have some extremely awkward moments. So I think it's kind of funny that, that awkwardness has now reached the handshake level where you're like, is it a fist bump? Is it a handshake? I mean, whoa, what are we doing?
I've got a buddy that does the cheek kiss, but only with women, and I can tell he creeps them out. I can tell he creeps them out. People have told me, mutual friends of ours, that it creeps them out. And I've always thought, this is a real cultural thing in some cultures. I'm not cracking on that, but this guy, I think it's just his way of getting up close with people. It's kind of a weird one. I'd be curious.
You
to
should
know.
Ask him if he's sniffing them at the same time. That might
maybe
embarrass him.
Maybe I'll ask.
Curb that behavior.
He doesn't lack confidence, so I may ask him next time as he's mid cheek smooch what he's endeavoring to accomplish. Are you a hair sniffer or what, pal? I was really interested to hear you say that humans excrete evidence of or an indicator of anxiety. Do you think, are the rest of us, all of us, are we picking up on that subconsciously? Because I can say certainly for myself, I can't think of a time that I've ever been aware of that.
Yeah, so this is actually research that stemmed out of some observations from law enforcement. So detectives had long noticed that people that came into an interrogation, they would, smell like themselves, right? Like their own BO. Meanwhile, after being stressed out for, however long the interrogation, they all left smelling the same, like as if there was this like anxiety top note that everybody produces when they're freaking stressed out. So scientists wanted to dig into this. And so they did this fun t-shirt study where they gave people t-shirts to wear, and they either made them watch a nature documentary or they put them in front of a scary movie so that they were either sweating, their own little pong or sweating out of fear. And then they gave it to a panel of sniffers who were, complete strangers. And the panel of sniffers could distinguish which were the odors produced in fear versus the ones that were just, normal BO. And of course, the group that has the most interest in this is the military, because you can imagine in a combat situation, if you've got a lot of soldiers in a tank, right, and one gets scared and they start producing this anxiety fear, what if the others smell it, also get afraid? What if this compromises the mission? So researchers funded by the military are trying to figure out, like, what is that chemical, like what is that molecule, and how to capture it, like a poison gas or like carbon CO2 sequestration, right? Like, how do you capture it and pull it away? But to date, chemists haven't been able to figure out, of the hundreds of molecules percolating off of our armpits and into the air, which one is responsible for anxiety. But they're working on it.
That's fascinating stuff. What an amazing line of work you're in, first of all. And questions are coming on the future of science journalism, so we'll leave some time for that. But you talked about detectives. An investigation, and you write about, I had no idea about this. This is fascinating stuff, how fingerprints and fingerprint analysis, actually sweat really plays into that. Can you lay that out for us?
Yeah, sure. So most of the sweat that we, produce, the salty floods that are coming off our body to cool us down, that's sourced from the liquidy parts of blood. So pretty much your salty sweat is way more than just salt and water. It's everything that was in blood minus the big stuff like red blood cells and platelets and stuff like that. Okay. So because the sweat on your body is like a treasure trove of information, forensic chemists are trying to analyze that information to find out details about people at a crime scene. So, in the past, when people have analyzed fingerprints, right, they look at how the whorls and the swirls, and they compare how a fingerprint looks to a criminal database. But what if they don't get a match? Then they don't know anything about the people who are at a crime scene. So now chemists are getting into it, and they are trying to analyze the chemistry of a fingerprint, because a fingerprint is is actually just a sweat print. It's inked in your own sweat from your fingers, right? And so an analytical science has gotten to the point where even from that trace amount left behind in a fingerprint, you can find out all sorts of secret information. Anything that's going around in your blood, it can come out. So I went and got my index fingerprint analyzed by this one forensic chemist, and she figured out very quickly that I had had a morning coffee because caffeine metabolites were like coming out in my fingerprint. Okay, that's not like super embarrassing or naughty, but had I spiked my coffee with like vodka or done a line of cocaine or anything, that also would have come out. And so she's, for example, done these analyses in one particular case of a stalker who left a fingerprint on a windowsill. And the detectives lifted the fingerprint, gave it to her to analyze, and she could tell that he was drinking alcohol and high on cocaine at the same time. And so, like, if you think about that, you know, in terms of like crime scene analysis, you can learn about the behavior and the health of people who are at a crime scene. On the surveillance side of things, it's a bit freaky, right? Because once this technology advances, you know, and gets into the public sector, you can imagine employers thinking, oh, I need to check to make sure you haven't come to work intoxicated. And we have like fingerprints all over our desks, right? Mm-hmm. Or you can imagine, you know, over in the States, health insurers saying, no, you've got a pre-existing condition, because you can diagnose some cancers from proteins that also come out in sweat. On the other hand, there's also like a whole industry of people who are like juicy salivating at like the commercial potential, because, you know, we all have our Fitbits, right? We're all interested in like how many steps we take, our heart rate, our temperature. Well, you know, the next stage in this is you can imagine Band-Aids that collect, you know, your sweat. They've got some electronics, and maybe they send a push signal to your smartphone after you've drunk a little bit too much to say, hey, dude, you need to take a cab home today. Don't like drive. Or, you know, even like think about the Olympics. You've got a team sport happening, a bunch of players on a field and a coach on the sidelines monitoring, you know, the stress levels coming out in like the stress hormones coming out in the athlete's sweat, and is like, oh, I think I'm going to exchange that player now because they're showing signs of fatigue based on, you know, the information that's coming real time based on the sweat pouring out of those athletes' body. So there's all sorts of really interesting and dystopian applications. And I really like kind of hope privacy advocates get on this before it, you know, hits the mainstream, because all of this is still kind of in development, but we're not like far away from deployment.
I can't, when I hear someone like you that's done this research outline the real world, tangible, practical, doable applications of some of this tech, I'm almost equal parts excited and terrified. You know, and part of there's this Luddite side of me, I'm going to be honest with you, that wants to just I kind of feel like we're good. I mean, I don't really mean this, but you know, we have backup cameras on our cars, and some of them can kind of sort of drive themselves, and all of my music, all the music I could ever want to listen to in the world is right here, and I can pay for things by tapping my phone, and I kind of feel like we're good now. And maybe we should just stop. I don't really mean it, but you know what I mean?
Yeah, I do. I kind of feel nervous about it too, like really nervous, because, you know, for somebody like me who sweats a lot, I'm not just leaving fingerprints. I'm like dripping on my yoga mat. Yeah. You know, what are we going to be learning? And also, like, if these private companies have all your information in a database, you know, what if they sell that information? Right? Like how often you drink alcohol, because that's coming out in your sweat. Or what if they're, you know, hacked, or there's a data breach in some way, right? Like it just feels like we are giving so much information out already in, you know, our Amazon likes and, you know, but like this is like a whole nother level of biological information. It's like giving, you know, samples of your like innermost secrets every, you know, 10 seconds to some database in the cloud as your like sweat is pouring out. And it's like, ooh, interesting alcohol. Ooh, interesting, you know, this or that.
Yeah.
So,
well,
yeah,
and
I'm worried about it.
Even in the examples you pose, I mean, you say like employers might be able to find out if somebody's impaired at work. And actually, I think probably the average person might say, well, that's fine. You shouldn't be high on blow at work anyway. And so I wouldn't maybe lack sympathy, though I would say the ethics around the collection of that information would probably be relevant and worth discussion. On the flip side, though, your very next example, and we talked about actually like mapping out genomes, and we talked about a lot of really interesting work being done about a month ago on the show and the ethical implications of that, including insurance companies being able to collect data on people and essentially deny them coverage. I think that's a very real scenario that people should be especially concerned about. And just because it's not loud and brash and obvious and in front of our faces doesn't mean it wouldn't happen. I think that's a huge area for concern. And I do agree with you. I think that privacy commissioners and privacy advocates, I don't think that we know enough about it. I mean, as a matter of fact, what is the average person? I've just noticed I just updated my phone and I can't even remember the details of it, but all of a sudden when I opened Instagram and Twitter and Facebook, and for the first time it said, this new update requires us to ask whether or not we can track your web activity and apply it to the advertising. And I said, no on all of them. No way. Why would I want that, right? Yet the very next day, this is a real example. I'm telling you, it happened to me a few days ago. An audience member reached out and said, hey, we know you have an air purification unit in your studio, and we're looking for one for our home. And what specific air purification unit are you using? And I DM'd them back with the information. And then I checked my Instagram a couple hours later, and up comes that air purification unit as an advertisement on my Instagram. And I'm not saying that they're getting into my banking or they know my social insurance number, although I wouldn't rule that out. But that stuff just freaks me out.
Yeah, I don't blame you. All of our Google searches, if you have a Gmail account, all of this is being connected to each other, and, along with all the algorithms of the things we like on social media, the things we click on or don't like. Yeah, it's a bit alarming. And particularly, with the DNA collection, it's actually harder to collect DNA, right? You actually have to find a hair or, a sample of, your old coffee cup to get like some spit, right? Our sweat is being left in so many other places. So, I do feel like the DNA thing is a lot more advanced. Like the technology to analyze DNA is, in many more hands than others. But once sweat analysis becomes mainstream, it's so much easier to collect a sample of somebody's sweat just from a fingerprint than to make sure you track down a hair or, a coffee cup.
Yeah. If you're just tuning in, if you're streaming our audio live on the Mixlr audio app right now, we're talking to Sarah Everts, who's a science journalist based out of Ottawa, a professor at Carleton University. She's the author of The Joy of Sweat. Sarah, you argue that sweat is humanity's evolutionary superpower. How come?
Okay, so it could be, first of all, so much worse. But, when you find out how other animals cool down, you're going to be so grateful for the floods that you have. But it's our evolutionary superpower because it's super efficient. So we can cool down while on the move, which means that we have this huge amount of real estate. We're the naked ape, right? That can, release sweat onto our skin, and it literally pulls the heat away and up into the atmosphere. If you think about a dog, right? It pants because its only naked area is its tongue, and it's using spit, the water and spit, to cool off its whole body off that little tiny bit of real estate. Whereas we, because we've got a huge amount, could run marathons. And in our evolutionary history on the savannah, if you think, most of the prey that we want to hunt runs way faster than us. So it sprints away. But because it's much more furrier and doesn't have as efficient a cooling down technique, it needs to slow down and stop. Meanwhile, we can run perhaps slower, but catch up, forcing that animal to run again and again until they die of heat stroke. Meanwhile, we can just keep running and exercising, cooling down at the same time. And in particular, this evaporative cooling, like evaporating water off a surface to cool it down, is super efficient. So Seals will pee on themselves because they don't have sweat glands, but they need to cool down, so they'll dispatch the other kind of bodily fluid that they have available. Vultures will poop on their own legs. Honeybees will puke on themselves. All sorts of animals pant, right, relying on saliva. So all of these animals are evaporating bodily fluids off themselves. Meanwhile, we don't have to dispatch gross bodily fluids. We have ones specifically devoted just to cooling us off. And so, yeah, it is salty, it is sweaty, we produce floods of it, but oh my God, it could be worse. Like imagine being in a really packed room, everybody really hot, and instead of sweating, they were dispatching other bodily fluids. Like, let's just thank evolution for, that gift.
Jerry, what are you doing? I'm so hot, man. I just can't help myself. I thought of one of my favorite celebrities of all time. I don't know anything about his personal life. I just know how cool he appears. If I say, all right, everybody's going to know exactly who I'm talking about. But I remember reading an interview once with Matthew McConaughey who said the secret to looking like he does was just to break a sweat once a day, man. And that was the advice. And I thought, that's great advice. Just try to break a sweat once a day. We look at advertising online for, Pelotons and other bikes and things like that. And I wonder if culture around sweat is maybe changing a little bit. You see people that are absolutely dripping, people that are soaked, and they're celebrated, and they should be, because they've accomplished this feat. They got off their duffs and they went out and exercised. Do you think that culture is changing a little bit with regards to how we perceive or even celebrate sweat?
So there's this really amazing catharsis that happens when you sweat in like large quantities, right? You get happy hormones like, endorphins, like that's responsible for the runner's high. But those happy hormones come like whenever you sweat voluminously. And so, even though we stigmatize sweat and spend $75 billion a year buying anti-sweat products, that's the size of the deodorant and antiperspirant industry, there's this equally large industry that, is selling us, gym memberships and all sorts of online things to break a sweat, right? Plus, there's this whole history of, cultural sweating. So if you think, through most of human history, we've liked to break a sweat, whether it's now or in the past. You have the, indigenous people of North America and their sweat lodges. You have the jimjil bangs in Korea, the hammams in the Middle East, the banyas, the saunas. We also like to break a sweat because there is a chemical catharsis that happens when you sweat in large quantities. And, perhaps, the sauna isn't as popular as a gym membership, but you do get that happy hormones that happen when you break a sweat because, you've effectively made your heart work a lot faster, and your heart beating really fast has, brought on these happy chemicals in your body.
Yeah, that's one of life's great joys, isn't it? Like a hot sauna until you can barely stand it, and then a cold shower right after, to me, is just absolutely fantastic. Did you, through the course of your research and putting this book together, was there a moment where you went, whoa, with regards to the results of something you discovered?
Oh, yeah. So many woes. It was, perhaps when I went to a sweat dating event in Moscow where people smell each other's armpits and to find love.
Oh, go on.
Oh, you want to hear about that? Yeah, I'm happy to tell you. Oh my God. So, the idea is pretty simple. If you are going to find a date, whether it's a one night stand or, your life partner, there is going to be a make or break moment. And that make or break moment is going to be when you smell the BO of that person. And so instead of basing the triage of who you're going to date on, optics or hobbies or, who knows what else, why not pick BO? Because, if it doesn't work, it's going to be a no-no. And so what actually happens in practice is you go to these events and the first thing you're given a wet wipe, and you're supposed to take off all the, products that you've put on. Then you go through this high intensity exercise and work up a sweat, at which point you're given a cotton pad to dab your parts. And then that is put into a jar, and the jar is numbered. Only you know the number, and the organizers know the number. And then you sniff through the jars. They're put on a table and you have to pick your top 5. And if I thought your BO was in my top 5 and you thought my BO was in your top 5, then we would be a match. And if we were matched, because this was in Moscow, in Russia, we would get both a VIP bracelet to an all-you-can-drink vodka cocktail lounge to find out whether the optics and the hobbies also matched up. So yeah, this was probably the most surreal experience of the book. Yeah.
That's incredible.
But I also, there's so many other, there's so many weird and wonderful sweat cultures, like the Aufguss theater, where people perform theater in a really hot sauna to, hundreds of naked participants who have just done the wave. I did that. Probably the weirdest moment of my life.
So
in a
cool
Coliseum
though.
Theater.
Super
Pardon?
cool. Super cool.
Yeah, also super cool,
Yeah.
super cathartic because,
Yeah.
it's great. So yeah, there's so many weird and wonderful sweat, activities to be done in this world.
Wow. Is it actually, let me remind people that you're a science journalist. When you talk about my wife, I don't know if I want to get sued by naming the specific product that I have, but I have this little sort of dab roller that quite frankly, I've been using about once every 2 months. Well, who cares? It's called Dry Sol. I've been using it about once every 2 months. And what it does is, like, for really heavy sweaters, I don't know if there's like a lot of iron in it or something. You familiar with it? And you roll it on and you got to keep your arms down. And typically you do it right before you fall asleep because it's actually quite uncomfortable. But it kind of shuts down your pits for a while. And for really heavy sweaters, I know for me it was a godsend through high school because it eliminated those embarrassing sweat rings. When my wife saw it just for the first time about a month ago in my closet, she was like, "What are you doing with this stuff? It's so bad for you." And I've not actually researched to see if it is actually bad for me, but I suspect it might be, considering what it does and how it works. Did you do any research on whether or not things like Dry Sol or antiperspirants are actually unhealthy for the human body?
So first you have to kind of know how they work for me to answer this question. So the way that your body odor from your armpits originates is actually not you. It's the bacteria living in your armpits. So we actually have 2 kinds of sweat glands. There's the stuff that gives you the salty floods, right? That helps you with cooling. And then there is another. And it appears at puberty, and it's responsible for morphing your armpits into stink zones. And that second kind of gland, the sweat is actually pretty waxy. Bear with me, I'm going to answer your question. And that waxy sweat is actually more like earwax than the salty floods that help us cool down. And the bacteria living in your armpit eat that relatively odorless sweat, and it's their metabolic byproducts, which is like a fancy scientific euphemism for bacterial poop, that makes you sweaty. So good news, your BO, the strong pong, not your fault of the bacteria. Bad news, the bacteria poop is what makes you stinky. Okay, so the way that deodorants work is they're antiseptics. So they kill the bacterial populations in your armpit that would, make you stinky, at least for a certain time until they bounce back. Antiperspirants actually physically block the pores. So it's a 2-for-1 because they are cutting off the buffet of sweat for bacteria that would want to eat it and turn it into stink zones. But they're also blocking the other kind of sweat glands, the salty floods, and effectively making your armpits kind of a dry zone. And the only thing that works is aluminum salts. To block sweat pores. It's just a reality. And, there's been a lot of concern that aluminum might be problematic because it's a neurotoxin. And, we don't really want to have too much aluminum in our body. But that being said, our bodies are used to getting rid of aluminum. It's the most common metal in the Earth's mantle. And our kidneys are extremely good at getting rid of it. And anytime you eat potatoes, spinach, it's in everything. Aluminum's in everything. And so a recent EU study, effectively the European Union has this scientific committee. They forced deodorant companies to do a big longitudinal, long-term-ish study on whether aluminum is problematic. And yeah, that just came in 2020 after years, and it looks like it's not, a problem to, wear antiperspirant. Now, you could argue Well, isn't sweat for cooling us down? So if you put like antiperspirant here, you're like drying out those areas. I would say, of all the things to worry about, you got a lot of other real estate that you can use for cooling.
Yeah.
And so I wouldn't super worry about, cutting off your ability to cool down from your armpit. And in fact, when you write a book about sweat, people tell you all sorts of interesting things. And like, I know this one woman whose husband sweats really heavily behind his knee, but just one knee. And so he puts antiperspirant, behind his knee because his pants would literally get wet. And, he was embarrassed about that. And she was, worried, is it bad? And, there's a lot of other real estate between, your armpits and behind your knee to cool off. Now, if you're putting antiperspirant on your whole body, that's a bad idea because, you're preventing your body from cooling down. But, if you put it in a little part here and there, it's probably not going to hurt you.
Fascinating stuff. This has been one of my favorite interviews since we launched this show. This is really amazing. And it's something that it applies to everybody, right? I mean, everybody can relate to something you've been putting in front of us. I want to remind everybody that Sarah Everts' new book is The Joy of Sweat, The Strange Science of Perspiration. It caught the attention of the New York Times. You may have heard of that newspaper, who placed it right on its 2021 must-read list for this summer. Let me ask you this as a hard swerve. In closing, you teach science journalism, and there's been two really interesting developments, I think, or conversations that have occurred over the past couple of years impacting journalism. Number one is sensitivity and greater understanding and respect in storytelling around Indigenous stories and reconciliation. And the other is reporting around the pandemic and COVID-19. And I think that journalists across the country, and for that matter around the world, have, for all intents and purposes, in many circumstances, done an amazing job trying to get up to speed on issues and science that has been new to a lot of people, that has been developing, whether we're talking about transmission or masks or whatever the case may be. What observations have you made about the present and the future of science journalism in particular, and specifically coming out of, and I'm going to say we're not out of the woods yet, but as we slowly emerge out of this pandemic?
Yeah. So do we have another 3 hours maybe?
Yeah. I mean, technically, sure. But
No. So one of the things that's been really interesting to me is that, this pandemic was one of the first times we saw science happening in real time. So most of the time in the past that you hear about a new scientific discovery, what's happened is the researchers have done their work. They've published it in a paper that has been peer reviewed. So there's been a whole bunch of like different scientists fighting about the results and like discussing it. And then once it's peer reviewed, it, gets dispatched into the world, at which point a journalist will pick it up and report upon it. So there's been a lot of due diligence that has happened before publication and before the media has picked it up. Of course, during a pandemic, science is happening in real time, and the media is trying to, report on what's going on as it's happening. And what's interesting to me is that I think the way that science journalism has been done in the past, where, a study comes out and then we present it, people have gotten the impression that science is this sort of like Moses goes to get the 10 Commandments kind of thing, right? Like the scientists do the work and the information is there. Whereas actually the way science happens in real life is messy, right? There's a lot of debate. It's constantly evolving. Mm-hmm. And it's not like, one study is the be all and end all. It's the like combination of lots of studies together where you then kind of assess, okay, this is the consensus, right? We've seen this with climate change. One study alone does not say that the climate is changing. Hundreds and hundreds and hundreds, right, are what people have been used to make these sorts of statements. And so with, the pandemic, even if you look at like the mask stuff, right? So initially people thought, okay, it's a coronavirus. It's probably like SARS, the one that we knew from 2003. That one was not transmitted by aerosols, right? And so they thought, okay, what we know about coronaviruses, which by the way was not a lot, is that, okay, we don't need masks because, it's not going to spread that way. As science evolved and as we learned more about this particular coronavirus, we're like, crap, it does, aerosolize. And so that's why there was this change. And now masks are recommended. But, instead of being like, oh, good, policy is, evolving with the science, people are like, everybody's wishy-washy. Whereas like my take on it is if they didn't change the rules based on new information, they would be like what? That's like, not evolving with the times. So yeah, I think what's really happened is people have seen just how kind of discussion and consensus driven science is, and that it's not like a Moses on the 10 Commandments kind of thing where, one study delivers the message. And so, yeah, that's probably one of my take home messages. And we can talk for the next 5 hours about the others.
I just wish I would love to sit in audit one of your classes. I would just absolutely love that. In the meantime, I want to remind people they can buy The Joy of Sweat, The Strange Science of Perspiration anywhere you find good books. The author, our guest today, Sarah Everts, who teaches, by the way, she's an award-winning science journalist, I should mention, based out of Ottawa, teaches science journalism at Carleton University. We took you way into overtime, but I've enjoyed every single minute of it. Thank you so much for this.
This has been really fun. Have a lovely day.
Thanks, Sarah. Great booking, Hoyles. That was fantastic.
Yay.
I feel like that, like she said, she's like, you got 5 hours. We could keep going on that. That was amazing stuff.
Yeah, I mean, that's what you always say, right? So I was like, oh, she is our people.
Yeah, she is our people. Wayne wrote in, by the way, in the middle of the interview. He said, am I the only one that likes my women musky? He says, there's nothing like a woman fresh out of a week in the bush. From Wayne, as we check in live on our unscientific, unofficial Twitter poll when looking for a partner for the night or forever, which scent impacts you most? Simple and freshly showered. This isn't even an exciting poll. This is one of the polls that it's just like when we had 10 votes, it's the same as when we're going to have 1,000. 55% approximately. 54% say simple, freshly showered. 35% enjoy a subtle perfume or cologne. Just under 8% prefer the natural musk, and then 3% holding strong at other, which is that's where we're getting our most interesting and oftentimes hilarious comments.
I just like that I'm right. I mean,
about the natural,
freshly
or the
showered.
simple, freshly showered.
I like that I have my bias is confirmed.
You know what? I'm realizing I should have put on there that I didn't, which is probably the one that registers most with me, is like a good laundry detergent. When somebody smells like, why are you shaking your head? Are you one of the people that buy these mysterious product, the laundry soap that announces that it has no scent?
I hate, like, it gives me, like I've said before.
Oh, you have a sensitivity.
It gives me a headache. So I'm just like.
Right. Fair enough.
And when there's those ads, they're like, boost it. So it feels like even after it's been used, it's still fresh. And I'm like, no.
Yeah. I like the ones that are like, it smells like it's just been brought in off the clothesline. Well,
that is a great smell.
That is a great smell, right? So maybe I should have included that on the poll. Well, good thing it's unscientific and unofficial, or else I'd really have egg on my face. If all this talk about sweating, watch this, has you looking to cool down, might we recommend the Dairy Queens of Northwest Edmonton and Sherwood Park. They wanted us to remind you that they are proudly serving, once again, the fan favorite Kit Kat Blizzard. The Kit Kat Blizzard is made with real Kit Kat candy bar pieces and a chocolatey topping blended with DQ's signature soft serve. You can get your hands on a Kit Kat Blizzard by visiting the Dairy Queens at Baseline Road, Y Gardens, Westmount, Newcastle, Nemeo, and Palisades. Make sure you tell them that Real Talk sent you. Want to let you know as well, for the month of August, they've got a big fundraiser coming up. These guys care about community big time. As a matter of fact, how I first heard about these Dairy Queens, we were working on a fundraiser together way back in the day, and they're the entrepreneurs that really care. We're proud to partner with them, and we encourage you to show them your business whenever possible. Speaking of business, it's no secret that running a small business is no joke. It's not easy. Life as a business owner is certainly hectic, to say the least. Let Alberta Blue Cross help you find a little bit of peace of mind with a group benefit plan. They offer flexible health, dental, life, and disability coverage for your employees. And even better, you can let your employees enroll and manage their own coverage at any time on any device. It makes life easier for them. It makes life easier for you, quite frankly. Alberta Blue Cross. Explore your options today at ab.bluecross.ca. And of course, we talk to you about our friends at Kubi Energy every single day. They present positive reflections. As you know, on the first day of our broadcast week, typically a Monday, on a long weekend, it'll be on a Tuesday. You can send in your positive reflections, random acts of kindness or otherwise, to talk at ryanjesperson.com. Of course, this week, Kubi Energy, we're down to the final stretch when it comes to the Real Talk Net Zero Solar Contest presented by Kubi. We've introduced you during yesterday's positive reflections to our 3 finalists, and now, Real Talkers, we need you to decide who's going to win that absolutely free solar installation. Here's how you do it. You go to ryanjesperson.com, and then right at the top of the page, you'll see our question of the week, presented by our official research and strategy partners at Y Station. We're asking you how you feel about solar, what motivates you to go green, so to speak, or what hurdles might be standing in the way. And then when you get to the final 3 pages, technically 4, of our question of the week, we'll introduce you to our 3 finalists, and then we ask you to vote. Next Monday, we will introduce you, or rather, it's not next Monday, is it? It's next Tuesday, because we'll observe the long weekend as a team. Next Tuesday, during Positive Reflections, we will announce who Real Talkers selected as the winner of the Real Talk Net Zero Solar Contest presented by Kubi Energy. Thank you in advance for your votes. We're hoping to see hundreds of them as we award free clean energy to somebody for the next 30 years. Thanks to the team at Y Station, we do have the results of our question of the week from last week, and this was a really fun one. We asked you about pets. We asked you about dogs and cats and gerbils and budgies and pythons and tarantulas and newts and everything else, and it was pretty neat to see what you told us. Now, here are some of the high-level pieces. I mean, these are the results of the surveys filled out by so many of you. Let's take a look. These presented by the team at Y Station. If Real Talkers could be a pet, if you could be a pet, 52% of you told us you'd be a dog. 37% of you told us you'd be a cat. And 4% of you told us that you'd be some other super cool thing, like one of you suggested a sea otter, which I thought might be actually kind of a cool animal to be. Here's something else that you told us. 35% of Real Talkers, 1 in 3, believe that their pet, your pet, has what it takes to be a social media star. And of course, we told you by way of an interview you can find in our YouTube or podcast archives how you can turn your pet into a social media star. 1 in 3 of you believe that that is the case. 93% of you believe that your pet is the best pet in the entire world, prompting the team at Y Station to wonder, what's happening with the other 7%? Y'all need a hug. I thought that was kind of interesting. You know what I thought is, like, most people will say that their pet is the best pet in the entire world. And I wondered if that might be the 7% may have been people we caught him on a bad day, right? Maybe Spot ate the arm off the leather couch, or maybe Dolly relieved herself on the area rug. It may have been just an in-the-moment type diversion on that vote. You know, you never know what might have been going on there, but 93% of you believe that. Let's get a look back to some of the other results presented by the team at Y Station. 89% of Real Talkers, almost 9 in 10, believe that your pet has some kind of special communicative bond with them, their human companion. Do you feel that with Ranger?
Oh, absolutely. I don't have to explain
How does
it.
it manifest it? Can you explain it? Is it explainable?
No.
It just happens. That's kind of the point, is that you can't necessarily put it into words. Sam, do you share that with Sophie?
Yeah, I think it's most obvious when I watch her communicate with strangers versus communicate with Kelly and I.
Ooh.
So when she's around Kelly and I, or like to that extent, my parents or my sister or people that she knows well, we call it her best behavior versus how she actually is. Like she's good at being on her best behavior around other people, and she gets a little bit more of that husky vocalization out, a little bit more of that sass in her voice comes out when she's around us.
Which is kind of maybe a bit of a human quality.
Oh, yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
I mean, that's how we are in front of strangers and people outside the house.
There was a study done with puppies, where basically like nearly newborn puppies, they took them and put them in situations where they were with human companions and they were without human companions. And they found almost right from birth, dogs inherently know to rely on the humans around them for support. Like they have that bond like straight out of the womb.
Do you know, is it because the humans are the ones, I mean, I guess not technically at the puppy stage, but does it have to do with feeding, I wonder, or more than that?
I mean, that is how they did the study. Is they
Yeah.
used basically hiding treats, and sometimes the humans would give them help, and other times the humans wouldn't. But yeah,
Guys, we had an interview about this.
Yeah, I know, but I'm just, we're
We
just
had an
just
interview about
we're hashing
this.
it out, Hoyles. This
Where
is
they said
small
that they
talk.
were-
We're
they
gonna get
were-
into the beers soon. You know what I mean?
That it's evolutionary, that the dogs have come to rely on humans, so they are like just refined in their ability to.
As they were welcomed in from wolves.
That's right.
Yeah, which always blows my mind too, to think that
You have a wild animal in your house?
Well, that
a couple of them?
Well, that, and also just the fact that every breed came from, I mean, thousands and thousands and thousands and thousands of years ago, one sort of general prototype, like a Saint Bernard and a Chihuahua have the same origin. Now, people are going to be watching right now or listening to the podcast, and they're going to say, there they go again. This show has such a dog bias. It's deplorable. You want to know why? Because statistically, you have told us, I don't like using the word of ownership, but let's say companionship. 83% of real talkers with a pet have a dog. 65% of, now these could be the same households, right? People could vote more than once on this one. 65% of real talkers have a cat. 33%, 1 in 3, have a fish. And then it goes down from there, but this is pretty interesting. Like 17% of real talkers, almost 1 in 5, have a small rodent in the house, like in a domesticated scenario. Maybe more of us have them elsewhere. Mice, rats, hamsters, and the like. Maybe chinchillas, just another fun word to say. 14% have birds. 8% have reptiles, which is higher than I thought it would be. 7%, these are a shout out to our rural real talkers. 7% have a domesticated farm animal. 4% amphibians. 2% keep insects, which I was intrigued by. I don't know if that means like, little Sally went out and captured a daddy long legs in the mason jar, punched some breathing holes in there, and throw some leaves in. And does that hurt your heart a little bit?
It does. It's not going to live very long.
Yeah, but it's a daddy long legs. I mean,
Have you? No.
Okay, Sarah. If you have a wasp in the house, you try to get it out safely, or does it get the rolled up magazine treatment?
Always to safety.
Really? I shouldn't tell you what's going on at our house right now. We've got exterminators. Would it really bother you to know that we have a serious wasp infestation, and it's currently, as we speak, being sprayed down with that? Would you let a wasp infestation fester under your deck?
No.
Yeah. Sometimes you got.
Yeah.
Sometimes you have to exercise what I learned as a young man to be dominion over the. Actually, Sam, do you mind? You know exactly what I'm asking for here. Sometimes dominion over the animals. Sometimes you got to flex. 2% of real talk. I don't even know if this is this true? 2% of real talkers keep a large rodent, a ferret, a marmot, or a capybara? No. 2%?
Capybaras are so flippin' cute.
They are, but domesticated in North America?
That I don't know.
Yeah.
Tigers, there are more tigers in North America than they are like in the wild. So
I thought you didn't watch Tiger King. Oh.
it's just in the zeitgeist. It's just in the zeitgeist. Girl Guide's honor.
Okay.
I did not watch Tiger King.
We asked about your companion animals and other interesting pets because I think 5% of you said that you have something super cool that was not on that list. One of you said, I had a saltwater tank for a long time with live coral in it, and we were thinking of getting an octopus, but the lifespan in captivity is sad, so we decided against it. Right? Oh, there you go. Another says, I had a squirrel monkey back in the 70s. It was acceptable back then. Fair comment.
Ross had one on Friends.
Yes. Although that was in the 90s, which
Yeah.
is like an eternity ago.
Yeah.
Isn't it? Like 1990 was 30 years ago? Does that ever just... Says the squirrel monkey was a great pet, but very messy. We had him for about 10 years. Others talk about oils. I think the mic probably picked that up. Well, I don't know. I'm sure that it went to the farm. It went out to the farm and lived out its days in a pasture with all the other squirrel monkeys. A horse, a show jumper, a competition show jumper. A real talker kept a queen ant for a while. As a kid, I always wanted an ant farm. That would be one of the coolest things to keep until it falls and breaks and smashes, and then you have a real problem. A real talker kept a rooster. Said he was born with a wry neck and a splayed leg, so he couldn't stand or move his head properly, and he had an eye infection. The daughter took him to the vet a few times, hand-fed him, medicated his eye, had him in the house for months, bandaged his legs to help him stand. He's now very handsome, if not a bit socially awkward and bumbly. That sounds to me to be the type of rooster I'd like to meet. Yeah. Real talkers have kept stingrays, hermit crabs. This is fascinating stuff. Fascinating insight into this. When it comes to dressing your pet up, 44% of you said pets are not people and dressing them up is weird. 26% of you said yes, but only functional clothing like cold weather gear. But I think that's a totally different scenario. We have a short-haired dog, a boxer. We would not be able to walk him in the winter without a coat. I mean, that would just be, quite frankly, inhumane. And then there's the boots, too. There's nothing like watching a dog wearing boots for the first time. Amazing. 16% of you said your animals absolutely refuse to wear clothes. 9% said they're not happy about it, but I love it so much. And 3% of you believe, yes, my pet loves fashion. So there you go. Fascinating stuff.
Fashion.
You may have heard of it. What about your pet are you most grateful for? Here are some of the comments that you wrote in to us. Balancing your mental health. One of you said your pet calms your anxiety and soothes your soul. One of you said that. I mean, that's one particular comment, but I bet you the majority of us would acknowledge that. Certainly, I would find mental health benefits from living with our two dogs absolutely amazing. One of you said Apex, your adventure pal. Apex is a powder hound, a wheel dog, a paddle pup, a patio aficionado, and a traveling fiend. I kind of feel like we need to meet Apex. By the way, the team at Grand Dog Essentials, Quality Raw Food, they reached out to us and said, whenever you do that Real Talk tailgate, they're in. We're going to have like a dog area. We'll see how we can work that out. That'll be pretty fun. Another says it's probably companionship, but the ability to lie in bed and just rub her tummy for a half hour, it's so soothing and it releases so much stress. Another says the soothing presence of a grumpy cat. Another one of you enjoys watching Fish Wars in your 750-liter tank. To give you perspective, that's just under the size of an average hot tub. Fascinating. To me, I don't have the discipline or I think keeping a fish tank healthy and clean and proper, and I know you can find ways to manage them and introduce you can do ecological tweaks where they almost clean themselves, but that to me, when you walk into a home and see a massive saltwater tank in particular, that to me is one of the coolest things. So neat. I love this. You told us you believe your pet has a special communicative bond. You said that 9% of you believe that your pet gets you in a way that other people don't. 22% of you said that you love that your pet loves you unconditionally, and they seem to be attuned to what you need. And 5% of you acknowledge that your pet sees you as a food dispensing unit. You feed, they eat. Appreciate the honesty. And we wanted to include this question, and I'll remind you, if you do support us on Patreon, we're so grateful for that. Our Patreon supporters allow the show to continue to grow and provide some stability to our revenue, which we're so grateful for. You can learn more about supporting us on Patreon via the link at the top of the page at ryanjesperson.com. Every week, our Patreon supporters receive the full top-line report from Y Station, so they get to really dig into the data, read all the comments. It's a really neat perk of being a Patreon supporter. We wanted to ask, after you lose a pet, I was talking to my friend Tammy about this yesterday. She's lost her beautiful pup, and she has an opportunity to to get in on a litter of dogs that she's always loved. Can you imagine a cross between a Great Pyrenees, a Bernese Mountain Dog, and a Newfoundlander? First of all, it's going to be about 180 pounds, I would imagine, full grown.
Big guy.
Huge.
You're gonna be grooming it and brushing it almost every single day, and absolutely nobody will mess with your property. But Tammy told me yesterday, and I'm not going to name the pup, because if I name the pup, everybody's going to know who I'm talking about, so I'll respect her privacy here. But she said, I'm really trying to decide whether or not it's too soon. And we had an exchange on whether or not it might help or hinder her emotional health. And we asked, after you lose a pet, how long until you get another? 44% of you said after a respectful mourning period, so it's somewhat subjective. You can start thinking about it. 31% of you said not for a while. I don't think I could give another pet what it needs while my heart is so broken. I respect that. 9% of you said my pet wanted me to be happy. They'd want me to get another pet as soon as possible. And 6%, and here's an interesting one, 6% said never again. I'm going to spare myself the heartache. Somebody that I care about very much, somebody very close to me, lost a dog that they loved dearly. Mm-hmm. And they told us that after she passed, that was it for them. They didn't think they could go through that again. I thought it was really interesting. A lot of you filled in the blanks on that. You said, we took 1 month to get a new pet when we lost ours. I couldn't cope with the empty feeling in our home, which I think would be huge. I know this is a difficult conversation for people, but I'd like to know, do you not reuse? That's kind of but the same dog bed, the same collar, the same water dish, or do you go all new? Would seeing your old pup's collar on a new pup warm your heart or break it?
Personal experience. I like little reminders of Emma.
Yeah.
And so her bed is definitely, I'm also like, me, I don't like to waste anything. I don't like to just throw things out unnecessarily. And so it's a nice little reminder that Ranger is using Emma's bed. I also got Emma's dog tag made into a necklace.
Oh,
so
really?
I wear it when I go on hikes and stuff. So I'm always like, Emma, you're with me.
Oh, Sarah, that's amazing.
And I don't know. For me, I feel like the grief is a reminder of my love for Emma and like what she meant to me. So the grief I don't think will ever go away. I never aim to replace Emma. I never can replace Emma. There will always be an Emma shaped gap in my heart.
Sam, do you think you could? I always feel like this is an awkward conversation to talk. Like let me ask you this more in a hypothetical way. Because it's kind of when we start using pups' names, it becomes much more personal. Can you see yourself reusing a dog collar?
No. I think I agree with Sarah. Some of the more utility stuff, beds, water bowls, that kind of stuff is, that's just sort of dog supplies. A collar's so personal. I think you've got to retire the collar.
It is.
Yeah.
And I think you can hang the collar, like people hang the collar on a nail in the garage or something like that. Like it's not, you don't get rid of it. But I don't know if another pup wears it.
I've seen people who will have their pup cremated and they'll put the ashes in an urn and put the collar around it.
Oh, that's a neat idea.
Something like that. Yeah.
Yeah. I'm not even checking the live chat right now because I know we're going to end up crying it the rest of the day. But these are all wonderful. Like, how about this real talker that came in and said, "Why would you monsters even bring up the idea that pets could die? These are my sweet angel babies." Another says, "I love my dog so much, but I don't think I could go through the puppy or training phase again. We'll enjoy our beautiful girl, and then we'll be empty nesters with more freedom." Another says, "Even if I am heartbroken, I'll wait 2 or 3 months and then go to a rescue to provide a good, loving home and give room to an animal in need." And finally, with weird food likes, we ask you, what's the one unusual thing that you feed your pet? Olive juice was on the list. Another said the hearts of 3 different animals. I don't think that's that weird. I think that's just...
That's when you need the reverb.
The hearts of 3 different animals.
No, it'd be more like the hearts
of
3 different animals.
What are we making here? And why are we in a cave together? Another says our dog's absolute favorite treat is broccoli stems. I don't know how this family figured this out, but you said our old family cat used to love strawberry yogurt on Kraft cheese singles. Was that an accident, or one of you has a husky cross who loves carrots and sings a special song if the carrot's particularly good? One of you said we only feed ours pet food or otherwise there's explosive diarrhea. And then we got a note from Chris Henderson, the chief strategist at Y Station, who said, anytime I can include diarrhea in a top line report, I will. Thank you, Chris. One of you had a horse that ate oranges, beer, and salt and vinegar chips. My man. A reminder that this week's question of the week will award a full solar install to somebody, and we're asking you about sustainable alternative green energy. So obviously there's going to be some really interesting information to sift through. Plus we're going to find out who's going to win that amazing prize from Kubi Energy, thanks to the participation of the group at Y Station. And thank you to the hundreds of you that show up every single week to answer our question of the week. We totally appreciate it. Before we sign off, I wanted to give a shout out to Kelly T. Kelly T is a Real Talker, an audience member that was one of the very first. Like, Kelly literally probably had to place their order the minute we listed our vinyl sticker pack on our website. And as you can see from Kelly's brilliantly and meticulously presented pickup, the Real Talk RJ hashtag being repped on the back window of that truck. So happy to see it, Kelly. Thank you so very much. A reminder, if you go to our website, ryanjesperson.com, under merch, you'll be able to see links where you can pick up the launch edition of our ceramic diner mug. You can pick up a Real Talk Ryan Jesperson t-shirt. Of course, our 950 snapback cap by New Era, and brand new, our vinyl sticker pack. You get both the Real Talk RJ hashtag plus our logo, Real Talk Ryan Jesperson. And every time you let us know how you're repping it, we want to see it. And there's going to be some cool incentives down the road. If I am out and about anywhere across this great land and we see a Real Talk RJ hashtag sticker, there will be prizes. Thanks so much for joining us today. We went into overtime on today's show. We're not going to apologize. There was just so much cool stuff to talk about. Tomorrow, the reality for farmers, it's a drought, and it's going to impact crops. It's going to impact this country. We're going to find out how. Plus, my Jasper memories and so much more. Later on in the week, we'll check in at the Ferry Creek blockades and a roundtable on Indigenous issues. That's coming up on Real Talk. We'll see you soon.